Governor's Office, LSO Budget Fiscal Administrator. As an introduction to the CARES Act discussion on the committee's agenda, I will acknowledge that there are multiple ways to count or document the spending of CARES Act dollars. For example, the Governor's Office initially had informal planning targets. LSO staff and the legislature were often not privy to those internal discussions. And then secondly, there is an allocation of funds, and that is a bit more formal. No obligation is made and no spending is made, but the governor has essentially earmarked funds for a particular purpose. And these are made available publicly with irregular updates of the Wyoming Sense website. I believe it was just updated with the most recent numbers yesterday. And then there is another category or tier, and that is those funds that have been obligated but not yet expended. For example, the state has engaged in contracts with testing service providers for COVID-19 tests, or perhaps they have purchased personal protective equipment and they have a contract in place, but the delivery of those goods is not yet complete. So those funds are obligated. Another example of this might be when the SLIB board or the business council approve a particular grant, but the grant has technically not been made, meaning no transfer of funds, but there is a formal record of a vote. And then the fourth category, which is candidly what I share with the committee or with honestly all legislators on a regular basis, and that is the amount of funds that have been expended to date. As of last Friday, there have been approximately $180 million of expenditures of the CARES Act funding. In some ways, this is imperfect as well because it's an overstatement as well as an understatement. For example, the full $15 million for lease assistance for tenants and landlords is included in that $180 million of expenditures because it has technically left the state's coffers and now resides over with the Wyoming Community Development Association. There are other examples when the money is transferred to community colleges or the university. It shows up as expended, but it really has just been transferred to those higher education institutions. There's also the reverse, as I described in the obligated fashion, where perhaps computers have been purchased by the judiciary branch. They have been received, but they have not yet been invoiced and paid for. So in some cases, you may actually have a bit of a lag of expenditure. So there's a number of things that can occur. But again, to recap, the four categories is planning, target, which is a very informal amount, the allocation, which is being made public on the Governor's Wyoming Sense website, obligated, that has to do with contracts in place or votes, and then the actual expenditures. As Tamara indicated this morning, the current guidance is that the cost must be incurred for the period ending December 30th, 2020, but that payments can continue for the subsequent 90 days. A larger point of this discussion as I hand it over to Tamara is that the governor has fully allocated the $1.25 billion. And with the committee proposals that have been voted on or discussed, either category, we have allocated an additional $600 million. So we're talking about $1.85 billion of potential ideas, including the three that you discussed earlier today on rural healthcare, broadband, and support for higher education. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'll turn it over to Tamara, unless there are any questions.
Don, quick question. If, Mr. Chairman, if you say allocated, and I'm sorry because I came on late.
Any questions of Don? Any questions? Okay, Tamara, go ahead.
That's all right.
You have questions.
How much has gone out the door?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Guru, $180 million is no longer in the state's possession as of Friday at noon. And we do those weekly. We update those numbers.
Thank you.
I will proceed. The memo that is at issue here is dated August 18th, 2020, and it's version 2. We did have a change that came in yesterday from the Appropriations Committee Chairman Boner, and we updated figures based on bill drafts that are under consideration that had been new conversations had taken place, and the figures that were originally included were wrong. So please do make sure that was the only change, but it's dated August 18th, version 2. It's the one provided online. And the difference was simply a $60 million difference in agriculture related business relief programs. And so what this memo attempts to do is take a snapshot that was requested by the committee to help understand where all of the moving pieces that the legislative interim committees are contemplating as they meet through the interim, and where the governor's office is in allocating the coronavirus relief funds. And that's really what this is a snapshot that goes back to Monday or Tuesday of this week, and an imperfect snapshot at that, as Don mentioned. Things that are being considered, that are considered allocated, may not have been expended yet, or there may be over allocations and some reversions that are going to be reallocated. The legislative side of things is also a snapshot because the committees are still working their legislation, and even legislation that's been approved for sponsorship, as we saw today, can be reconsidered and amounts can be changed. And so take that for what it is. Just try to provide you a snapshot with some tables. We have 4 bill drafts that have been approved by interim committees or task forces as of the date of this memo. And those are bill drafts that deal only with appropriations of CARES Act funds. So legislation that deals with the other important issues that the standing committees are considering that make policy changes, they're not included here if they don't have that CARES Act appropriation. We tried to limit that since this is the Appropriations Committee and they're developing ideas for what to do and how to proceed. So those 4 bills are listed in Table 1, and they would amount to $475 million. That would include travel business relief, Minerals Committee business relief for a large business stipend program, the Labor Health Committee for grants to community health centers and rural health clinics, and the Broadband Task Force that approved for recommendation the Rapid Broadband Development Reimbursement Program, which when I go on to Table 2, you'll see that, or later in this memo, you'll see that that's already been implemented by the governor. Table 2 provides a list of pending bill drafts impacting CARES Act funds that were scheduled as of the date of this memorandum. I'm aware that there are 2 other requests, I think by the Education Committee and by the Travel Committee, that were requested publicly, but those bill drafts are not yet public and they're not yet on an agenda. And so back to the snapshot, we just limit it to the bills that are ready to be considered and we know about and are public and we can talk about in this meeting. So we have those 3 bills that are under consideration. The appropriations bill that we just considered is a big part of that. And then there are 2 other Agriculture Committee bills that I believe were posted or should be posted today. The first would provide now $80 million for agricultural business interruption stipend program, and the second $20 million for meat processing program. And then we have the appropriations bills and those appropriations that we just discussed during this meeting. Those new items under consideration in Table 2 would amount to $477.3 million. So Table 3 tries to recognize that there are some duplication of efforts between the governor's planned allocations and the legislature's proposals that are under consideration. For example, broadband, we know that the governor has allocated $100 million, and similarly, the task force had allocated that. And so Table 2 takes these subjective duplications and tries to account for them. It accounts for $5 million in tourism relief for businesses that appears duplicative. It accounts for $57.5 million for education resilience, which is that governor's program for higher education, duplicative in a bit of the bill draft that we just considered. And that's subjective because of course those bills are a little bit different. These programs are a little bit different, but just try to make that determination. So then 100 million duplication and 105 million duplication for healthcare system fortification. And so when we take out 267.5 million, 100 million for those duplicative efforts, we would be left with 684.8 million of new legislative ideas that are still under consideration or public as of right now. There could be more coming later. So table 4 just takes that governor's allocation snapshot and lists it here and shows how LSO was provided information about how the governor's office would expend the 1.25 billion, which is what is envisioned in 2020 special session laws, chapter 1. Absent further legislative action, the governor's asked to go ahead and spend the entire amount. And we've captured in the final column on table 4, the governor's allocations that are funded or B11 processed. This doesn't account for more pending items that are waiting for B11. So the Wyoming Sense website would account for those amounts that are waiting for B11 that'll be approved soon, or maybe some of them already are approved by now. And the governor's office has prepared a presentation that is posted online that goes into better detail about all of their programs and how they account for where the funds are at any moment in time. But this memo was just intended to provide kind of a summary snapshot of where the legislative pieces are and where the governor's office is. And I'll stand for any questions or let the committee chairman talk about their bill drafts and initiatives as well.
Before you do, would you explain Appendix A, please?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Appendix A was provided by the governor's office to LSO this week.
Just 1 second, Tamara. Go ahead, Representative Summers.
Mr. Chairman, I can wait till after she answers your question. Mr. Chairman, my question simply, Tamara, is on the broadband thing, and I raised this to Dawn. The governor's office has spent 86, not 100. And so when you have that table 4 funded or B11, so how do you rectify those two numbers, the 100 million versus the 86 that we see put out?
Mr. Chairman, I'll try to quickly answer, but I think the governor's office is going to be best to explain this. That's how they've reported their data to us, is that it's been B11 process, which means it's been moved from the office of the governor to another entity through the B11 documentation process. And so I might let Dawn or the governor's office explain those distinctions, because there's a lot of them about where it specifically is at this moment.
Why don't we do this? We'll just wait till we get to the governor and then their representation, and that's when we'll talk about Appendix A2. So we'll do that then. So with that in mind, any questions from the committee on these 4 tables before I ask the committee chairman to chime in? Any questions? There being none, let's go to the committee chairman. I see Senator Coe right there on my screen. Senator Coe, welcome. Do you have any comments you'd wish to share with your JAC?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Not really at this point in time. JEC is acting pretty much separately from what you see here. We have not forwarded on any or worked any pieces of legislation that I'm aware of, and so I have no comment right now.
Thank you for that, Senator Coe. How about Senator Anderson? Are you out there? Hello, Senator Anderson. I don't see him on my screen. Don, has he been notified?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I did email both Senator Landon and Senator Anderson. Senator Landon just recently left the meeting, and I don't see Senator Anderson present at this time either.
Okay, then what I want to do, Don, as soon as you see them pop up, whatever we're doing, I want to interrupt and we'll let them speak. And so with that in mind, I think if we go back to where we ended up this morning, is we're going to open it for public comment if those people that wanted to comment on the COVID bill, are they back yet, Don?
Mr. Chairman, there were two individuals, both from Sublette County Health, who had signed up for public comment. Neither of them are available. One of them participated or was watching this morning, I could note, but neither of them is available now. The only individuals now are Director or Dr. Caldwell from the Community College Commission, and the university representative, I think, with us right now is Mr. Moore, Kyle Moore, if they have any comments.
Okay, then we'll just hold off on the two Sublette County residents. And if in fact they pop up, Don, while we're doing the other testimony, let's be sure and hear from them. Okay, we'll start off with Dr. Caldwell. Go ahead, Sandy.
Yes, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, I will go very quickly through the topics. I was trying to capture all of the various questions, so many I think have been answered, but if not, I'm happy to circle back and answer anything that I might miss in the list that I have. A few things that I wanted to clarify. One is I did send to the LSO an example of the total cost of attendance that institutions are required to publish for the institution for public information. It includes on campus, off campus, and living with their parents. We are compiling a summary document of that so that you could see that across the institutions. The question of the application and working jointly and putting that together in roles, I will share that the Community College Commission and the University of Wyoming work together on an application or a certification. The institutional applications are different, but the certification or application required for the students to apply for the grant funds for both the adult fund and for the college grant, we did work collaboratively on that, and we're using the same document. We do allow the institutions to customize with their logos and that kind of thing, but it is consistent. We do have the cutoff date for verification of eligible students as November the 1st. We are tracking it, however, weekly for both the adult grant and the college grant. That is important, particularly for the community colleges where they do have late start courses. For example, Western Wyoming Community College has 5-week blocks, and we want to make sure that we are not in conflict with that. However, the institutions do verify the eligibility of students based on what is called the census date or the official report date that they are required to have per U.S. Department of Education federal compliance. So that part on the institutional side is covered. I do also want to mention that we do have the approved funding request. I provided some white papers on that. We can talk about that in just a moment. In terms of enrollment, prior to this funding, as you heard Co-Chairman Nicholas respond, the colleges were varying between 20 and 30% down on enrollment. As we were getting closer, and on the 31st, I did provide testimony to the Wyoming's Tomorrow Task Force that they were below 16% in headcount and 17% in FTE. Upon the announcement on the 5th of the adult grant and the 7th on the college grant, release of the guidance on August the 10th, the colleges have had quite a long line of students who have been seeking this funding. As of yesterday, I don't have it for today, and I will tell you it will change as of today just based on the financial aid offices doing their work. That has shrunk to both 11% headcount and FTE, which tells us those students who may have already been enrolled are taking more course load, which is what we were hoping to see. So we have closed that a lot from the 20 and 30 down to 11. And we can see from the announcement of the funding that did have a very quick impact in terms of total students. One thing I wanted to address directly with the draft legislation in front of you is the concern around, or what we wanted to make sure that we brought up. I did visit with Director Cooley, and that is that has the private Title IV eligible institutions going through the Department of Workforce Services, and that is very different from eligible training providers. The Title IV is not an aspect that Department of Workforce Services is familiar with or works through, because that is out of the U.S. Department of Education. And that is something that's very complex, as you heard Ms. Ravalli discuss. If you wanted to potentially look at other training providers that were not the traditional Title IV or post-secondary degree granting institutions, either for credit or non-credit, you might want to look at Department of Labor eligible training providers. And I would absolutely defer that to Director Cooley and Department of Workforce Services, because that's very different for the list that they provided for the eligible training providers. In the funding that was released by the governor's office and approved through the Attorney General, the Community College Commission is the coordinating entity for the credit institutions. There's 3 of those that have potential ability. That would be WyoTech. We are directly working with WyoTech. With Wyoming Catholic College in Lander, we're directly working with them, and actually with the U.S. Department of Education, trying to get them eligible. And then I believe Cheeks Academy is the other one that administers Title IV funding. However, those are all non-credit. So I shared a large amount of information. I'm happy to respond to any other questions. There's just a lot of complexity around this, and I want to distinguish the concern around Department of Workforce Services certifying Title IV when that's very different and not within their familiarity.
Okay, thank you for that, Sandy. Members of the JAC, any questions of Sandy on her comments? Go ahead, Senator Hicks. Senator Hicks, turn your mic on.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Sandy, how does the enrollment this year, as far as the patterns, compare to year over year? Don't we typically see right there towards the end a spike in enrollment just because some students weren't able to find full-time work, so they decided to go to college anyway? So what are the numbers comparison-wise with, say, the last 3 years or 2 years average?
Go ahead, Sandy.
Mr. Chairman and Senator Hicks, and we do the comparison for where we are now also year over year. You're 100% correct. We do typically see a spike as we are going into the semester. However, we have closed the gap from where it was to where it is now comparative year over year. We are still below last year. We are less below than what we were prior to the announcement of the funding. We were 20% moving into 17% below, and we are now at 11%. So we have seen a significant change in a very short amount of time. We also know that the financial aid offices do have a significant backlog. We are going to see a big change in the coming days just based on the students that are applying. I can tell you that it is both new students coming who were not enrolled, but also existing students who were enrolled, but some of those existing students are in fact increasing their credit load, which we know is a benchmark for ultimate completion of their programs.
And Mr. Chairman, just to follow up. So Sandy, if we take the last 6 or 7, we always see some annual fluctuation. I know junior college attendance has been down, but what kind of variation or range have we seen? 2-3%, is that normal? 5%, or was it 11 kind of would be an higher end of what we've seen in the range for the last 10 years, variation from year to year?
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks, from 10 years ago, our head count is actually up, and the FTE is down. That has to do with a couple of things. One is the reduction in remediation that the colleges have been very focused on, and also the increase in percentage of students for degree production. In terms of head count over the last 3-4 years, we have had a decrease in overall headcount in enrollment, but it does exceed, or it is much less. You are correct. It is in that 2 to 3% system-wide per year versus where we are seeing for the impact of COVID-19.
So, Mr. Chairman, so if we take out that natural annual variation of up or down and we say we're at 11% now, we could probably say realistically that maybe only 7 to 10% of this is maybe COVID related or somewhere in that ballpark when you factor in the normal annual variation with enrollment and head count. Is that accurate?
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks, it very well could be. Another complexity in this was the additional opportunity for the displaced and dislocated worker and the adult grant, and seeing what that overall impact will be. So I think you're in rough estimates, I would say, yes, we are closing that gap. There may have been some, but we also know that we have a larger displacement of our adult workers that we anticipate are going to continue to come on because they're actually eligible for both pots of funds.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and one of the things, Sandy, to provide to the committee would be if it's really 5 to 7%, that's probably an accurate assessment of it. Just tell us in terms of replacement dollars to cover that, what dollar amount would be. If we did that and worked it through the community college commission. Okay, any other questions of Sandy? Senator Coe, you got any questions that you'd like to ask her since you're chairman of the Joint Education Committee? Okay, I see a thumbs down. Thank you, Sandy. All right, Don, is there someone else out there that would like to provide testimony? I believe we have someone from the University of Wyoming. Is that not correct?
That's correct, Mr. Moore.
Okay, Kyle, welcome. Where are you? There you are.
Happy to be here today. Kyle Moore, AVP for Enrollment Management at the University of Wyoming.
Welcome. Go ahead.
Thank you, sir. I do have a bit of data that I'd be happy to share with the committee if they like, related to our applications and enrollment since we released and promoted the CARES Act to our incoming student population. And so I'll be happy to share that or answer questions.
Yeah, we want to hear it.
Yes, sir. So when the university provided the opportunity to start applying for the CARES grant, and this was August 10th, what we did is started tracking how many new applications we were receiving each day. And so what I can report from a point in time comparison to the same weeks over the past couple of years, that week of August 10th through 17th, that same comparative week previously, we received 60 applications to the University of Wyoming. And this year, in that same period of time, that has increased to 140 applications. The breakdown of those applications for residents is 110 of that 140 are Wyoming residents, the other 30 being our non-resident friends from across. What that has also resulted in is an increase in overall enrollments. We've averaged just under 100 enrollments in that same period over the past couple of years. And this year we've had 191 additional enrollments occur since during the period of time from August 10th through August 17th. So there's certainly been an increase and a responsiveness to the CARES funding.
Let me interrupt you right now for a second. Those enrollments would those be freshmen? Would they be sophomore, junior, seniors? Or would they be postgraduate?
Mr. Chairman, that's a great question, and that would be all new undergraduate students. So it would be both. It would be all categories of undergraduate students.
Okay, go ahead.
And so to date, total of our total enrollment right now, we've received 5,241 CARES Wyoming grant applications, which is really positive. Of that, the majority of those are our resident population. 3,091 of that number are resident undergraduate students, and 1,467 are non-resident. So the bulk of the applicant respondents so far has been our Wyoming student population. So we're happy to see that in both the new applications to the university as well as enrollments of the last week. We're glad to know that our Wyoming residents are making up the bulk of that population.
Okay. Is that what you got?
Well, Mr. Chairman, the only other thing I would say is to give you an update on headcount enrollment as of today, August 18th. We are at 11,500.
Okay, and I think last year you were 11,250, something like that. Is that right, Kyle?
So, Mr. Chairman, the enrollment as of this date, or as of 6 days prior to the start, because our semesters are starting a little different. So if we look at a comparison of 6 days before start, last year we were at 12,036 students. So we're 536 away from where we were last year.
And how many of those are actually just occurred in the last week or so? Again, you said 160, is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, it's 191 new enrollments since the 10th of August.
Okay, thanks. Any questions of Kyle, committee? Any questions? Thank you, Kyle. All right, anybody else show up for public testimony, Don?
No, Mr. Chairman. Public testimony individuals are complete. If you wish to proceed to the governor's presentation, you could, or if you want to go back to the bill, that would also be an option.
Okay, well, first of all, we'll close public testimony to the COVID-related bill. And since we just heard from them, here are some options for the committee to consider. You know, one, of course, is to move the bill and then to go ahead and work the bill and amend as appropriately. If we decided to do that, I would like to take any major amendments that members of the committee would like to take. And it's come up more than once today while we've been talking about this COVID bill that it may very well be a moot point if we don't have a special session. So rather than spend a whole day modifying, working this bill, it would be the pleasure of the chairman if in fact we decided to work the bill. We took a few amendments that people felt like they wanted to get in there, yay or nay it. And then unless there's an objection from the committee, I would probably want to table that bill and let it be worked with a working group and we see if we have a special session or not, rather than spend a day debating issues when in fact they may all be moot. And of course, the other thing we could consider doing is to separate the bill into 3 different categories, which would be rural hospitals, secondary education, COVID-related funding for the broadband, and that would be the 3 categories of the 3 separate bills. We could do that as well. So with that in mind, Mr. Co-Chair, do you have anything you wish to add to what I just said?
No, Mr. Co-Chair, I would concur that I think generally we want to expend the COVID dollars. And we want to do it in a way that we get the biggest bang for our buck. But this bill, I think, just based upon what we've heard today, we could easily spend an hour or two working the bill and tinkering with the bill, which at this point I think would be, you know, a fairly, I just don't think are the best use of our time. My preference would be, as you recommended, that I would like to have Tom Walters bring an amendment to the bill so we can open the bill and work on it, so that just so you guys will know what that amendment is.
And it has to do with, you guessed it, UW Law School and COVID impacts. To that, I would suggest that we, other than getting input from the various folks, I think that it would be better served for the working group to look at this bill if we get notice of a special session, and we can iron out our differences, circulate it, or have a quick meeting to kick it out of the committee.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. Any objections from any of the members of the JAC as to how we proceed? Okay, Representative Summer, are you objecting or you just got some ideas? If you're objecting, I may not recognize you. If you got some ideas, I will. No, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not objecting. I would never object to you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to point out, I think the public that's listening as well. And I think as we have developed these COVID funding bills, and we have worked with the governor's office, I see Rennie McKay kind of popping up on our screen now, starting to pop up. You know, a big part of what we're doing is trying to express to the governor's office and kind of the state where some of our priorities lie. So even whether we go to a special session or not, I think it's important we do this work because we do express, I think, somewhat the legislature's view on how some of this money should be spent. And I know the governor's office listens, and I just think it's important that we do it. So thank you.
Thank you for that, Representative Summers. Okay, committee, go ahead, Senator Hicks.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, just a thought, when we went through the memo from LSO on these, is if we decide to move this bill and back to the working committee, one of the things that I would like to see them do is because the question I had is that we already have a bill from the broadband task force. How is this different than the COVID bill that we have? Same with labor and health. They've got grants to community health. Here's what my preference would be is if we've already got the standing committees, that the work group works with those standing committees. So we don't end up with, if we go to a special session, we don't have two broadband bills, we don't have two community health center and rural health clinic bills, that we somehow integrate those into what the standing committees have been working on and have one bill on each, one for rural community health and one for broadband instead of one from the committee and then one from JAC. And so that's just a suggestion moving forward, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, thank you for that suggestion. Points well taken. And I think that if we in fact work this bill and get a motion to work it, and then we table it to the working group, I think that you may very well be involved in that working group, Senator Hicks. So you can maybe get that taken care of. So with all that, any other discussion, committee? There being none.
Yeah, Mr. Co-Chair.
Go ahead, Co-Chairman.
Yeah, just to tag on to that, if my perception is if we have a special session, and in all likelihood, there'll be some type of a super committee or a kind of a consensus committee that's going to take everything in and condense it all down into one or two bills. I don't see how this can, otherwise we're going to have a 5-day special session, and I don't think that's realistic. So Larry, I think you're right on, and I think that's probably what'll happen.
Okay, do I have a motion on the bill?
I would move the bill.
I have a second. Been moved and seconded. Okay, committee, what's your pleasure? Do you want to work the bill page by page, which I think that probably would not reflect what I would like to see, or we could have any amendments that just are burning on someone's tongue to bring out, and we could bring them up and vote them up, vote them down. What's your pleasure? What do you want to do? Do you want to work it page by page or bring conceptual emotions? Mr. Co-Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. Don just recently sent out an amendment that you should all have in your inbox. And I think that Tom was going to present the amendment. So I remove that we move up. We recognize Representative Walters to walk us through the amendment.
Well, we need to move the bill first. Are you moving the bill? We moved in second.
We already did.
Go ahead, Representative Walters, and make your motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. All of you should have received this amendment. Mr. Richards sent it out. And this is the same discussion we had this morning. It's for the University of Wyoming Law School. We discussed the need for it as the law clinics provide for these folks that are don't have means to get legal services. They've been impacted greatly by the crisis of COVID-19. And this just allows the university to spend those dollars and authorizes them to spend any dollars available, possibly some of the COVID dollars that are available. One thing I'd point out that was a significant part of the discussion this morning, and that is there a need for the legislature to approve something like this if they're using all private dollars or all grant dollars and no state dollars? And really there's a long-standing practice that the university gets approval from the legislature, especially for educational related facilities that are built on campus. There was a discussion this morning of the Gateway building and its construction. And I would point out that it was really an anomaly to the university's construction processes. And that is the University of Wyoming Foundation built that building and then donated it to the university. And so that's why it proceeded through the process in a far different manner than any of the other facilities have on campus. And so rather than belabor the point, I think everyone can read the amendment that's before you. That's the purpose of this amendment. And that's really what we have going on here. So I would happily answer any questions at this time.
Yeah, thank you, Representative Walters, for bringing that amendment. Has everyone received it? Everybody's nodding their heads. Any questions of Representative Walters on his proposed amendments? Any further discussion on the proposed amendment? Any amendments to the amendment on the proposed amendment? Okay, all being in the negative, what we're going to do is I'm going to ask for all those in favor to raise their hand, and then I will count those votes. And if it's a discrepancy, we'll call a roll call. All raise your hands that are in favor of Representative Walters' amendment to the bill. Okay, I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I see 5 votes. I see 6 votes. Okay, which member of the House is not voting?
Mr. Chair,
I counted 7.
There's 7 votes.
There's 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All right, I guess yeah, I see 7 now. Okay, that has passed. Are there any other proposed amendments to the bill that anyone would like to make? Any other proposed amendments? Okay, absent any objection, I'm going to table this bill to be worked on by the working group, depending on what happens with a special session or not. Anybody have an objection to that? Okay, there being none. Mr. Co-Chair, do you want to dispense with the CapCon bill at this particular time?
yeah, I think Representative Walters, actually Representative Larson had a motion for it.
Go ahead, Representative Larson. We're back on the CapCon bill now, which has been tabled, and I'm bringing that up at this particular time. Go ahead, Representative Larson.
So, Mr. Chairman, my understanding is we're up for the final, for the vote on the CapCon bill. And prior to doing that, I'd make a motion to reconsider the amendment that we made in the CapCon bill, if there's a second.
I see a second. That motion is in order. We voted to bring up the CapCon bill. There was a motion to amend it. I believe it was Representative Walters' amendment. That amendment did pass. Now there's a reconsideration to discuss that amendment. So we're voting on the reconsideration. All in favor, raise your hands. I don't see Chairman Nicholas voting. Okay, I see him now. Do we have 7? Did you count 7, Don? Oh, wait a minute. Representative Olson is, oh, he's an aye. Okay. that motion to reconsider has passed. I counted 7. So, you know, the motion on the floor is not debatable. We're voting on Representative Walters' vote to amend, and so it's been reconsidered. So if you vote aye, you vote to leave it in there. If you vote no, you vote to take it off, right? Tamara, she's on board. Is that correct, or Anna? All right, I think I'm right. So now the vote is to act on Representative Walters' vote. If you vote aye, you vote to leave it on. If you vote no, you vote to remove that amendment to the bill. All in favor, raise your hand. Seeing none. All opposed, raise your hand. Oh, wait a minute. The co-chair voted no. All opposed, raise your hand. Okay, that motion has been removed from the CapCon bill, and my understanding that now we had voted in the affirmative to advance that CapCon bill. So the CapCon bill as amended, as now amended and removed the amendment, will move forward since we've taken affirmative vote of that by the committee about a month ago. Anybody have any questions on what we just did? Okay.
Mr.
Back on
Chairman?
our agenda.
Chairman,
Go
Mr.
ahead,
Chairman,
Senator Kinski.
I believe what we did is we brought the bill back for reconsideration, and then we amended it. Now we have to vote for the bill again. The bill
No, we
was
don't.
brought back for reconsideration.
No,
The bill is on the table for a vote. It cannot advance at this point because it's under reconsideration, Mr. Chairman.
No, we didn't reconsider the bill, Senator Kinski. We reconsidered the amendment to the bill. That's in order. Once we reconsider the amendment and remove the amendment, now we have the bill as presented, which means the bill as voted on stands.
Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead, Senator Hicks.
I believe our staff attorney would like to weigh in on this issue regarding Senator Kinski. So Anna, could you clarify that for us, please?
Go ahead. If I stand corrected, I'll listen, but I've already run this up the ladder. Anna, go ahead.
Oh, Mr. Chairman, that's fine. My understanding was that the committee took a motion to reconsider on the bill before lunch, and that passed on the bill. And so I thought the committee would need to take another motion on whether to sponsor the bill or not.
I don't think so.
I don't think we took a motion to reconsider the bill before lunch.
No, we didn't.
I don't think we did. If I'm wrong.
Mr. Chairman, parliamentary
Wait a minute.
procedure-wise,
Whoa. Hold on a second. Senator Kinski, go ahead.
I don't know how you would bring a bill back to reconsider just the possibility of amending it without bringing the entire bill back. We brought the bill back for reconsideration. There was a motion to amend, that passed. We have reconsidered the motion to amend. That amendment's now been stripped off, and now we have to vote on whether to sponsor the bill, which is what we voted to reconsider this morning. So if we do not take a vote, that bill does not move forward.
Go ahead, Senator or Representative Larson.
So, Mr. Chairman and Senator Kinski, what I thought we'd done this morning is made a motion to reconsider the bill, to consider amending the bill that we had adopted at our last meeting. And so when we voted to reconsider the bill, then we brought the Walters amendment. And then just now we went through that exercise. We didn't vote on the final bill as amended yet. That was on the schedule to do. So then we voted to reconsider the amendment on the bill, removed the amendment. And so now the bill is back approved as it was this morning when we started.
Anna, you try to weigh in on this. I think that's, I don't have my Roberts rules in front of me. I think, our committee chairman rules, but I think what we've done is well in order and the bill stands, because at the end of the day, the bill that now we voted on in the affirmative is the same bill we're talking about now. Why would we have to re-vote on what we already voted on? Anna, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I may be wrong, but my understanding was the committee took a motion to reconsider to reopen the bill and amend it. And as soon as they did that, the original motion that you took at the last meeting no longer existed because you are reconsidering it. And so my understanding would be that the committee should take a motion right now on whether to sponsor the bill or not.
Well, it's, we could argue that both ways, I guess to do it properly, we could certainly vote on it again. Mr. Co-Chair, do you have any feelings on this?
I don't. However you want to proceed.
I'm inclined to, you know, we're a long ways from, go ahead, Anna.
And Mr. Chairman, I was just saying, that's kind of based on what happens with a motion to reconsider during session. The committee does not have any rules on this, so I would defer to you, Mr. Chairman, on how you want to proceed.
Well, that's what I thought where we are, and I think the way it stands right now, we voted on the bill, and it is now in the original form that we voted in the affirmative, and so I'm going to let it stand at that point and not take another vote. Senator Kiske, you wish to comment?
Other than stating it's impossible to amend a bill without bringing the bill back for reconsideration, if that's the ruling of the chair, that's the ruling of the chair.
Well, the chair just ruled, and the only thing I will say that it's far from being over. And you'll have plenty of opportunity, this committee, to work that bill. It has to go through the entire process again. And so if there's hard feelings about the way I've ruled, change it. Okay.
I don't have hard feelings.
There you go. All right, we're moving ahead. Let's get back to our schedule. Where are we, Anna or Don, on our schedule? Are we ready for Rennie?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I believe Rennie McKay from the governor's office has a presentation. I will share my screen as he walks through that, potentially with the assistance of Erica Liberty.
Thank you, Don. Okay, Rennie, welcome. Good to see you. The floor is yours.
Mr. Chairman, thank you so much again. Rennie McKay, Governor Mark Gordon's Policy Director, and I'm joined this afternoon by Erica Legursky, and she is the Policy Advisor to Governor Gordon related to the budget and also for a few other policy areas as well. But today, Erica has done a tremendous amount of work with the Budget Department and the Auditor's Office to administer the CARES Act. 1.25 billion is what we'll be speaking about here this afternoon. And what has come to shape over the last couple of weeks is the governor's plan. Now that we have a little bit more certainty from the federal government, some of the programs are now that we were working towards, the SLID program for local governments and healthcare. Those are all up and running at this point. And so it's given us some chances to evaluate where dollars are going and look at improvements that are possible. So thank you for the time here to speak with you. I think a few of you have mentioned it, but Representative Summers' comment there that we have worked closely with many legislators and have looked at bills that you all have drafted and then passed out of committees.
Hold on a second. People that aren't talking, would you please, there we go, shut them off so we can hear him. Thank you. Go ahead, Randy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So again, appreciate the opportunity to have worked with so many of you on these programs. A big thank you to the Attorney General. I think the Attorney General and the entire team over there have done a tremendous amount of work to follow the statute that you created during the special session, and yet to keep dollars going out the door to where they're needed to respond to this crisis. So with that,
Really, before you start, one more time, we've had our committee chairman waiting in the wings to provide some testimony. It'd probably be helpful for you as well to hear that. I see Senator Anderson is on board. Jim, do you wish to make any comments at this particular time as a chairman of the Minerals Committee?
Mr. Chairman, we are working on another bill that would need to be put through that is for larger companies We're talking real large, $100 million payrolls and $1 million worth of valuation and that kind of things. So we have a large company bill that we're working on that we'll probably be working on at the end of the month. But that's the only thing we have left that would be COVID related. Thank you.
So Chairman Anderson, what you said is you have no bills that you've approved and you're working on one for large companies for another funding model. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Chairman Anderson. Do you have anything you wish to add to any of our discussion this morning you've been listening to?
I'm just enthralled with the discussion and your meeting. Thank you.
Enthralled. Well, I'll take that to the bank, Senator Anderson. Thank you. And while we're doing this, is Senator Landon out there, Don? Okay, we'll open up.
Mr. Chairman, he is not.
Okay, we'll hold it open for Senator Landon. Go ahead, Randy. Sorry for that interruption.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. No problem at all. Appreciate hearing from Chairman Anderson as well. Jumping back into that presentation, we just wanted to show you what the plan is as of today. And I think we've all had to recognize how fluid this situation is as new guidance becomes available from the U.S. Treasury, as Congress takes action or puts out draft bills. We try to adjust the spending plans to account for different scenarios. So this is the plan as of today, and it is subject to some change as we move forward. But what we would also present, and Ms. Legursky will present in particular for our office, is where money is allocated. And that means we're using that term to say that it is more than just planned for going into that area. There's either been a B11 signed, or in some instances, one of the situations we have is the SLIB board has already approved projects to these amounts. And we're in the process of getting the dollars over to the Office of State Lands and Investments so they can fulfill those approvals that have already been made by the board. So those are some examples of kind of what our process is, what we'd like to work on with you going forward as well, and really appreciate Mr. Richards and his work. We will continue to try to make sure that you're well up to speed on how things are going, because between planned, allocated, and spent, there are other steps too, and I think that will help inform everyone to understand what dollars are available at this time. So Don, if you want to go, I think a couple slides now, I'll take you to the overview of the plan for the 1.25 billion, and then we'll get into the how much is allocated already and has gone in to fill these buckets. So as you can see, we've set up again some project names for where we want to put a focus. And the largest is in doing business relief and using the guidance from, using the direction that you provided in the bills that passed during the special session to get business relief out. And those programs have been very successful. The first $100 million got out to those small businesses that you designated and got out quickly after the bill passed, and we were able to stand up that program. And now the applications and the demand for the second and third programs has also proven to be very high. And so we've got those dollars, a total of $325 million out in that area. Worked with the broadband and task force as well.
Randy, let's talk about, you mentioned the different categories. It's authorized, spent, out. How much money, what's your best estimate of the total dollar amount at this state that has gone out to our businesses in Wyoming under the the interruption, the relief, and of course we don't know on the last one yet. How much is actually out?
So $100 million is out, and the applications are in. So there was almost 4 programs. If you'll recall, the first one, the allocation was $50 million towards that program. and that was 50 employees or less, and with a prioritization on those that didn't get PPP and had been impacted directly by health orders, and so were either closed or had their businesses impacted by those orders. So that $100 million is out. The next $225 million.
On that for a second. We had 50 million, the governor moved 54 million, and that was for the interruption, right?
Correct.
Okay, go ahead.
And so the second program of up to 100 employees and up to $300,000, the applications for those have been very strong. So there's a demand for every one of those, and the first checks have been cut on that. So in terms of out the door, that again started up again today to go above the 100 million. But the applications for the full 325 million is there. The one gap at this point, we moved a little bit more money into that second program from the third program, which was to businesses of any size, so including the largest companies in Wyoming could apply for that money for COVID expenses. And that program, the demand, it has not outpaced the dollars to date. I believe there's about $22 million in applications for a total of $40 million in that program right now. So
money from the mitigation fund to the relief fund is what you're talking about doing. And then that fund now has been oversubscribed, and you say the checks have gone out the door. So people should be receiving the money for the relief fund this week. Is that what you're saying?
The first checks on that, because we were talking those larger amounts up to 300,000, the business council did take a little longer to review those applications to make sure that everything was in order for those first checks to be cut, but they were sent today, was the first round of those checks going out. And because there's so much demand, yes, people should be looking for those checks to be hitting their bank accounts very soon.
So when some people ask me about those checks and they get a response from the business council that says you'll be getting $5. So unless they've heard something else, they'll get the $5 check went out today. Is that what you're saying?
The first checks went out today, so they should be, if they were told they would get $5 and that's what they applied for, then that should be arriving soon.
Thank you.
So the broadband program allocated $100 million there, used the task forces program to shape that, and took applications from providers from around the state. And the target with that, to align with the CARES Act, was unserved or underserved communities. So if there's no provider in a community, or if what is provided is a lower speed, that's what qualified, and took applications. And to hit those targets right away in terms of what people applied for that met the criteria, there was $86 million in applications. And so those specific contracts are now under review. But again, the hope is to have those contracts out and construction happening soon, because what we're trying to do is respond to COVID by making sure that people can get online if they need telehealth, if they need to do education virtually, or if they need to work remotely.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, this is Representative Summers. And Rennie, I really want to thank the governor for this broadband program and getting it out quick. I just wanted the committee to note the one difference, probably the primary difference between what the governor did and what the task force did, was the speeds. The governor settled for speeds of 25.3, and the task force wanted to go to a higher speed in what would be considered underserved, unserved. So that was the primary difference, and just so everybody knows.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Thank you. And one other thing to note there is that wasn't any application. We were not approving projects that would have gone in and created competition in an area that already had that broadband of those speeds. So again, this should make a big difference. And I want to thank Representative Summers and the others who are involved in that task force for helping move that along. We do feel like that's going to make a big difference as we respond to COVID.
Okay.
Next up, local governments, and I believe you've discussed this already, as we're trying to allocate and get dollars out the door to both make sure the local governments are able to respond to COVID and to look at the draft Senate bill, and that requirement that 25% of the 1.25 goes to downstream governments and makes them eligible. We were looking at the program. The current means to distribute money to local governments per the bill that passed is that they would apply to the State Loan and Investment Board, and if the board approved, then they would get that funded to reimburse or to help pay for a program that meets the CARES Act. And so the SLIB is going to consider at its next meeting on the 27th of August doing an allocation so that local governments, all local governments, would know how much money is allocated to them based on a formula that the board will approve. But it would be a mix. Right now, the proposal out there for people to comment on is a mix of population, COVID impact, and economic impact. And so that would determine the distribution of dollars or the allocation of dollars. And then a community would have to still go and apply to get that money from their allocation amount. But that way they know how much is there. And as their costs come in through this year, they can draw that down.
Yeah, Rennie, I have a question, and it gets back to the broadband, and either you or Representative Summers might be able to help me. I heard from some of the people that applied for those grants with SLIB that just referenced that 86 million you just talked about, and their comments were that primarily went out to independent telephone companies, and a lot of the other concerns about that last mile never really was addressed. How would you respond to that comment I received from one of my constituents?
Mr. Chairman, and I think people need to make sure they understand this this was not about getting broadband to someone's home. It was to get it into a community where they would have access to it. So, right, we would not have been able to afford just the last mile issue, but we've got many communities that are unserved or underserved right now. And so that was the priority, is getting it into those communities so people are able to access it, have some means to be able to purchase and start to buy it. So we're not providing internet for the public. We're providing through this program, it's the ability to access it through the marketplace.
Well, but we've talked we talked about last mile. In my community, that hasn't happened. And certainly the number of people affected, I mean, I don't know how you prioritize, but we talked a lot about it this morning about getting that last mile, and that's what I thought we were doing. Now you're telling me we're not. So 86 million went out the door, of which very little, if any, went to last mile. Is that a fair assessment?
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Representative Summers.
Mr. Chairman, I would say that's inaccurate. If you take my county's case, and I'm not going to name providers, but certainly they're a wire provider. In other words, they're not wired, but they're microwave. And so that'll all be last mile. The infrastructure, the tower to go the last mile is what they're getting funded for, but they're going to be putting, internet out to people that have never seen internet. And I think that is the case most places, except probably the one or two long fiber hauls up the eastern side of Wyoming, where there just simply hasn't been any internet. You have got to move the fiber before you can get the last mile if you don't have any fiber there, because you just can't move. You can't move it along. So I think that's inaccurate. I do think, though, that you are correct in saying that there are places that need to be served better. That's one of the reasons I brought up the speed, because I don't agree with the speeds, because that leaves communities out of expanding last mile, particularly at the edge of cities. And I think we often forget and think, well, it's available. Well, it's not available necessarily. So I think we can do better, but I do think this got to the last mile. We just
Well,
need more.
The question I would ask then, Representative Summers, is millions of dollars of capital was spent to get at least to a lot of our communities and throughout the business community, but the last mile never happened. So in areas where they didn't have any of the money spent, we're going to subsidize all their initial costs as well as the last mile. Is that what you're saying? How is that different than, the millions of dollars that is spent in communities and now the last mile is not on the list? Go ahead, Representative Summers.
So, Mr. Chairman, I think in most cases it will reach the last mile. So when an outfit puts in a microwave tower and they get paid for that, then they will sell that individual service to that person that can be reached from that tower. I'm talking about in the case of microwave. And so you're not going to pay for my hookup as a state that wants to provide access. You just want to provide to make sure that I can get access. In other words, you're not going to pay for my monthly subscription to that provider. You just want to make sure that I have access to a monthly subscription, that I have access to internet. And so, I didn't look at every project closely, but the vast majority of those projects are going to go straight to the last mile. And even the one that is the long haul fiber connection on the east side.
Well, but that's my point, Representative Summers, is the capital that was provided so I would have access if I could get the last mile, which I'm not able to get. I'm talking about my business now and parts of my community. The capital to get it there made available was paid by private sector, but yet now we're going to pay for the wireless to come in with the telephone companies, and we're going to pay for that capital to get it there, even though they'll have to pay for the last half mile. So I think there's a disconnect there. But anyway, that's what the SLID board did, and it's done. So I think we need to really address that last half mile where I'm not sure communities that already got the fiber there will be able to get that money and access to it. We can talk more about it later, but go ahead and move on, Rennie.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just continuing to move along here, the testing and contact tracing, 100 million there, already $60 million is with the Department of Health.
Just a second. We got people wanting to talk here. I see Representative Larson, then we'll get to Representative Schwartz. Go ahead, Representative Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Rennie, would you mind going back to the local government slide there and explain to me again? I'm not quite sure how I understood that distribution was going out. You said that there was a formula, but then if I understood correctly, you said that there had to be an application to get the funds. And that's a little contradictory to me. So tell me where I went wrong.
Go ahead, Rennie.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Representative Larson, so the current system that is in place today is an application model. The governor brought up and the SLIB asked to investigate further changing that. We believe in both instances, this conforms with what you passed during the special session. And so what the change would be is that there would be an allocation, but that's different than a distribution. So because of conversations with local governments and also looking at the CARES Act guidance, that it wouldn't just be we cut checks. It would be that a community knows what they have been allocated and they could draw that down. And there would be guidance also provided to say, if you spend on these things that are clearly okayed in the guidance or in federal law, you can move quickly to draw that down. However, if there's more of a policy area or policy question about does this conform with the CARES Act, then there could be more of a review of that proposal to draw that down from the allocation to the local government. And Representative Larson, since you'd be interested and several other folks would be as well, the idea here is that $200 million goes to cities, towns, and counties, and 10 million goes to the tribes. And then there's another 5 million that has already been allocated through to local governments in other ways. And we could see this on the next slide if this next slide helps folks understand a little bit more of the plan. So if you look at the 215.
Follow up, Mr. Chairman, on that, Rennie. So I appreciate the difference between an allocation and a distribution, but if that's allocated, are they still have to, are we getting away from them making an application and just saying, here it is, be judicious and govern yourselves, and if you don't govern properly, you're going to be accountable? Or are we going to micromanage each of those ideas that they're going to use it on? And
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
There remains this tension between that we've heard from some locals is that some of them want to make sure that their spending is okay, because if they spend incorrectly, then they would be held accountable for it. So we've even heard from locals, don't just give us a carte blanche. We want to have some sort of back and forth that we know. So the ideas are that there's guidance, so it can be very clear so that they know that they can spend on those things, and then they don't have to go apply and wait. So that the idea is to try to speed this up and to give more of the responsibility to the local entity. But we are providing that mechanism if they have a policy question that could go either way. Is this okay in the CARES guidance or is it not?
thank you.
Okay, Representative Schwartz, you had your hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Rennie, earlier this morning, we were having a discussion about a stipulation for CARES that up to 25% could be used to replace lost revenues for the state, but it was conditioned on a match to local governments. And I'm just curious if you all had any discussion, I mean, because we see here 215 to local governments. Did you discuss the possibility of then 215 for the state to use to replace lost revenue?
Go ahead, Randy.
Mr. Chairman. So per the draft Senate bill, the state could use up to 25%, so $312.5 million on revenue replacement for the state under that bill if it were to pass as is. But we could only do that if we spend 25% not on revenue replacement for locals, but a total of $312.5 million on downstream government. So that also includes K-12, community colleges, and some other political subdivisions. So if we can spend that, then we could spend up to $312.5 million on state revenue replacement. Locals could use what's allocated to them on revenue replacement, or 25% of it at least, as I read that Senate bill. Under our plan, we do not have revenue replacement planned for the state, because if you look at that plan, I think to hit the priorities that you've all established, that the governor has, and to meet the needs that we think are there, we would be, if that revenue replacement became available to the state, that would, I think, have to be a discussion that's had between the governor's office and the legislature to look at where we had planned to spend money and to see if any of that should be pulled back for revenue replacement. But certainly we can't even achieve that if we don't get the money out to locals.
So follow up, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
So I understand, we've got essentially the 1.25 billion allocated. But my understanding is 215 is going to local government, which would qualify for that match. That's the first half of this follow-up, right? Am I correct?
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, one clarification. 215 is yes, downstream governments, although the 10 million for tribes, we don't believe would be downstream governments, but there are, within the plan and within already allocated dollars, there's money going to other downstream governments. So that would get to 312 at least. Right. So it's not just locals, it's also the K-12 portion of it, and it's also the community college portion of it.
Yeah, okay, so that's what I thought. So then I'm wondering, because we might get to the point in November where we've allocated money, but it looks like we're not going to spend it. We could then use that for the revenue replacement, because that can be spent essentially instantaneously. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead.
Well, this is where it gets complicated, is that Senate bill changes the deadline for the spending as well. So it takes it out to 3 months after the end of our fiscal year in 2021. So the end of September would be the deadline. So we'd be looking at having this discussion in probably mid 2021 to find out if there was any money that was allocated and not spent. That's when, because I believe those two things will be married. An extension and revenue replacement would both happen. My understanding, if I'm trying to prognosticate, would be, it would be very unlikely that you'd have either or, it would be both.
Great, thank you. So it's a possibility we can keep in mind.
Yeah, and Rennie, the entire presentation is based on current law as we understand it. Nothing about what may or may not be. Go ahead, continue then.
All right, thank you, and thank you, Mr. Richards, for having that pop up there. So again, testing and contact tracing, at $100 million, it goes to the Department of Health, but then they're working with their county health offices and distributing that to counties as well. So it's another means to get to funding of local governments. The evictions and food security, the 15 million is allocated in the state law and is at the WCDA and is going out. Erica, I'll have a little bit more information to you about that program. And again, because that's in state law, that's how we say that, where that plan is. But as we all know, the pace of spending on that has not hit what we expected. So that would be an area where it's possible to reallocate as the year goes on, possibly.
Let's talk about, before you get the eviction, testing and contact tracing. So the testing we're talking about here would be for the cities, towns, and counties for their employees, I guess, for the state government for employees, nothing in the private sector. Are you talking about private sector as well? And so if it is, what's the means? How do you do that? How's that determined? And then contact tracing, I have a little problem with contact tracing just in general about, who I'm around, what I'm doing is kind of my own business. However, I don't think there's any law that supersedes that. And I don't believe the state said that we shall implement that through our health officers. So why are we putting money aside for that anyway?
Mr. Chairman, so the testing, there's several components to it. There is the enhancement of the state health lab where they're running diagnostic testing. There's also a program that we're instituting to, with the Department of Health is leading, to look at wastewater testing, and we have the ability to look at wastewater and detect not just if the virus is present, but how much virus is present, to have some indication. The hope is that this program will help us understand if there is more COVID-19 in a community, or is that going up or down. And then to your point, there are also surveillance tests that are available more broadly. So some examples of that and how that goes into out across the state. We're working with school districts right now to see how many of them would like to volunteer to have a surveillance testing program run for teachers. We're also looking for private partners who want to do that type of testing program. And so I believe already in Teton County that is up and running, that the county health office developed a plan and worked with industry partners. I spoke with the Chamber of Commerce up there. Senator Guru invited me to do that and talk to them about what was available and got some feedback on that. And they were seeking businesses that wanted to volunteer. So certainly if there are businesses that want to get more surveillance testing and testing of employees, that's something that can be considered, and especially if they work with their county health office and the state Department of Health. To your last question on contact tracing, it is certainly a very common part of any outbreak management anywhere in the world to do contact tracing. We've had that program up and running for other diseases previously, and now, well, I think all communities and states are trying to do that, because the goal is, if we're going to capture this virus and slow its spread so that we can get back to having our communities and all businesses running without any health orders, we've got to get the transmission rate down. So that is the point of contact tracing, as it is with other diseases.
Well, I understand, why we want to do it, and I understand the importance of it. I'm talking about how we get it done, and I'm just trying to see how government's going to come in, and if someone, 50 people test positive, so you're going to go out to those 50 people and implement a contact tracing with each one of them individually and try to go back and see what they've done the last week or 2 weeks? Is that what you're talking about? So anytime somebody tests as positive, whether it's false positive or not, you're going to look at what they've been doing the last 2 or 3 weeks, where they've been, who they've been with, and all of that. Is that what you're saying?
Mr. Chairman, that is how those contact tracing programs work. If there's any doubt about the validity of a test, then obviously you're waiting on the other test and before you're imposing anything on people. But yes, the goal is to do an interview as quickly as possible of a person that tests positive. And generally speaking, Mr. Chairman, the people that we're interviewing were symptomatic and very sick. So especially at the beginning of this outbreak, we weren't doing surveillance testing. There wasn't the testing supplies available. So if somebody was getting tested positive, they'd showed up because they were symptomatic, and then a test verified that the symptoms that they were exhibiting were caused by COVID. So that we're dealing with that as well. And then yes, as quickly as possible, interview them, understand where they've been, who else might be at risk, so you can notify them, so that we slow down these transmissions.
I understand all that, and if I buy it in the way you're doing it, so how does the money get spent? Do you spend the money within the state to go out and do it? If you come to an individual and they say, do you allow them money how do you go back to do the fully implement it? Do you go back to from the point of where the disease is contracted and then allocate the funds to go out to everybody else and do the testing that way? I'm just trying to figure out how government's going to make this work.
Mr. Chairman, there's two parts of it, and the most important is people. So both at the county level, some counties do their own contact tracing and have for other diseases as well, and others leave all that up to the state health department. And so in both instances, the money is going to hire more people. So there's contractors that have been hired over the last few months, so that there's more people to do those interviews. So yes, if you tested positive, you'd be getting a call from one of these contact tracers. They'd be interviewing you to find out where you've been, who might be exposed. And there's no, we acknowledge that that is as good as your mind. We have tried to develop some technological tools. There are 2 apps that the state has partnered with, one with Apple and Google, so that you could have an app on your phone. So if you voluntarily download it and other people voluntarily download it, it could be another means to get the word out there. And another one of the apps traces where you've been. And then if somebody calls you, test positive, somebody asks you if you have the app, you say yes. And then you can read off your diary about where all you've been, so you're not just relying on your memory. So there's a tech piece and a personnel piece.
We're gonna hire more government employees to maybe help implement. I get it. We got a couple of questions. We'll go to Representative Larson first, and then Senator Grew. Go ahead, Representative Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Rennie, I think to your last comment, I don't know that it's necessarily that the government will need to grow to do this contact testing as much as provide the parameters, and those entities like a school district or a college or whomever that wants to participate, that then can outsource that contact testing to whomever can provide that. Is that not correct?
Go ahead.
County.
Mr. Chairman, either the county health office or the state health office, depending on the agreement between the county and the state, are the ones that have to do the formal contact tracing. Right now, the University of Wyoming, for example, is doing contact tracing as well. But in terms of if someone truly tested positive and they're going to be isolated, that order needs to come from the county or the state.
Okay, you got a follow-up, Representative Larson?
Well, I guess just a quick one, but does that have to, it's under the direction of the county or the state, but does the actual contact tracing, that exercise, have to be by a state or county employee?
Mr. Chairman, in terms of the interview and the work, no. For example, the University of Wyoming is helping with that. But in terms of if you're going to go to the level of actually isolating somebody and having them have a quarantine order placed on them, that does need to be done by one of them.
Okay, go ahead, Senator Guru.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to kind of follow up with what Rennie was saying. We're not growing government here on this program. That actually state's helping us by getting the test kits to the county health department, and through the Chamber of Commerce, our local business community signs up. Our business is signed up to do it. And then we work also with the hospital. We pay the hospital, or we can pay it. There's another local doctor that does it. That you can pay for specific tests. But if you get involved in the surveillance testing program, which really helps us from a tourist perspective, because frankly, that way we can kind of keep track of all our employees. And the employees all kind of interact together. And so that's been kind of the biggest thing that we've had to work on. But we've worked on that a lot privately through the business community, working through the chamber, but the office, the state, and the governor's office has been great working with the county, getting the kits to us. So that's where they've been super helpful.
Thanks, Senator Guru, for that input. Appreciate it. Okay, Randy, continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So yes, for the other places that testing supplies have gone out to our long-term care facilities and the prisons and congregate living, so any place where that's happening. So as you've all probably seen, unfortunately, we do have COVID cases in the prison system now. And so some really robust testing is being used to isolate the people who have that. So we can keep the virus from spreading further there. The same thing would apply at the state health, the state hospital and the Life Resource Center in Lander. So we've gone through evictions and food security, education resilience, the 175 million there. That breaks down again. If we go to the next slide, you can see a little bit more detail on that. That includes K-12, the community colleges, and the University of Wyoming. So there's, I believe it's $42 million has gone to K-12 to help with technology needs from the CARES Act, so that if necessary, that students can learn online, or if they cannot return to a school, they can learn online. Additionally, there's been the protective equipment, PPE, distributed to schools. And then higher education, both funding to help with PPE and testing, and the hardware required to comply with health orders and to keep students safe, or to deliver online virtual education has been provided out to higher education. And then there are the two programs essentially related to education. One is the adult education to help those displaced workers who are directly impacted and lost their work, so they can go back for retraining. And that's $7.25 million has gone out to higher education to provide those opportunities for students for that retraining. And then $50 million is allocated to the University of Wyoming, the community colleges, and students at private schools as well, for financial aid related to if they're impacted by the COVID and the financial side of the global pandemic. So those are out there, and as you heard, the grants are being used now.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about the education side of it. The numbers we get from talking to our commission, Community College Commission, and the university, the numbers that they're projecting because of enrollment loss, if you could actually show what the enrollment loss is, are substantially higher than what the governor has set aside. Help me out.
Mr. Chairman, because CARES Act cannot go for revenue replacement, we can't just give those institutions dollars to replace what they've lost. So to comply with the CARES Act, what we're doing is helping the student, not the governmental entity, out to be able to encourage them to go back to school and Clearly, that cannot equate one-to-one to revenue replacement or make up that difference. But we came up with a program that we believe does help students, does help the institutions carry on, and also complies with the CARES Act.
Well, we had that conversation this morning, and we think we are complying with it by changing, taking out the tuition and fees, and leaving the rest of it in there, and that fully is in compliance. Where's the disconnect? Is it just an interpretation of, once again, our attorneys versus your attorneys? Is that where we're at, or is there any consistency there?
Mr. Chairman, I believe that there are some differences of opinion on that, and also because the main one that you're pointing at is tuition, and tuition equates to revenue replacement, whereas the approach we took was to get that money into financial aid to deal with the costs above tuition for that are more applicable to the student, not the institution.
Well, but we're not talking about tuition, Rennie, when we're talking about our program that in the bill we just discussed a little bit ago. We're talking about, as I understand it, room and food and those kind of services, which clearly are within the COVID definition. So maybe we just need to have a discussion between your lawyers and our lawyers to come to reconciliation. There's consistency there.
Mr. Chairman, if you said tuition the first time, so our program is for food and lodging. So if that's where that's at, then we're in agreement. The other thing is we wanted to make sure we got something out there at the beginning of this semester. So that was the goal with our program. Getting that in place is using what the Tomorrow's Task Force had set forth as concepts, and then making sure we got there. But so again, we focused on food and lodging as a financial aid. So if that's where you're at, then I think we're on the same page.
We are. That's exactly where I'm at. The difference is the amounts of money in terms of the information we get versus where you are.
So, Mr. Chairman, we weren't trying to align with what the revenue loss was at the institution. So that wasn't where we're aiming. But certainly there's a huge difference probably in our dollar figures, because we're only doing the first semester, because only the first semester is before the deadline in the CARES Act. So,
we're looking at the first semester. We're not talking about tuition. We're talking about in loss of enrollment, same thing you are. Anyway, we don't need to discuss it any further. Maybe, Randy, what we can do is have you get with Tamara and try to figure out, or the Wyoming Tomorrow's group, and figure out where the differences are. But then we can reconcile that. So go ahead, unless somebody else has a question, go ahead. All right, go ahead, Rainey.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. So the next pot or area we wanted to focus was unemployment and workers' compensation. And again, we spoke about this last time we met. We believe that the way the CARES Act again is set up, that there would be a big challenge in trying to do a rate holiday, but we do believe we can keep rates from increasing if we can use that full $60 million. We have had a change in trying to make some other decisions, and that is with the presidential executive order to set up the lost wages program. And if the state would need to be contributing CARES Act to pay for those unemployment claims that are above and beyond, again, what we already provide. And if that would come out of the 60 million that's allocated there. So we do believe that the main, there is the guidance from Treasury that you can use this to solidify the trusts so that rates do not increase for employers due to the layoffs that they had to make because of COVID, that we could be using those dollars, and those could go in at towards the end of the time. So that money has not been put into that trust at this time. So again, an area where we can have further discussions as we look at things, but we'll also be having to make a decision related to the presidential executive order. For the next bucket, judicial and legislative branches.
Hold on a second, Randy. Representative Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Rennie, so help me. So that's to keep rates from going up, and the impacts would be what from causing the rates to go up? It would be impacts by virtue of claims to the workers' compensation fund, but we've said if those, and we've allowed COVID to be a workers' compensationable, if that's the right word to use, claim, but we've said it wouldn't impact rates. Is that where you're trying to mitigate that increase, is by the fact that we say that COVID won't impact the rates if there's a claim on it? I'm trying to figure out how you're saying it's going to keep rates from going up, but I'm not understanding where the pressure is to go up unless it is from COVID.
Mr. Chairman. But with workers' compensation, at this point, there actually have been very few claims. So I would actually set aside workers' comp. What I'm mostly talking about is the unemployment trust, because there's probably many people watching or on this committee. If you had to lay off one of your employees without action, that would mean that your unemployment rates are going to go up. And obviously the unemployment, the layoff might not have been of any of your doing as the business owner on that. So that's where there's actually the bigger issue that we're trying to make sure that rates don't go up. And that is definitely something that the Treasury guidance has said is something we can do with that. So the workers' compensation at this point, we'll keep you updated, but at this point that is not obviously coming in to be a big factor, but the unemployment rates could be going up for everyone who, if they had to lay someone off. And again, because of health orders or something happening elsewhere in the globe, that might not have been at any cause of that business owner. So that was the aim, to keep those rates from going up.
So, Mr. Chairman, if I may, that was going to be my second question. And I agree that is going to be, we know that that's going to be impacted, and we also know that that'll be one of the easiest ways to give relief to businesses. And so my question is why are we holding off on putting that money in there?
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, as you know, we've got our unemployment trust is one of the most solvent trusts, if not the most solvent trust in the nation. And so at this point, we have not seen those impacts. And so we're still trying to figure out exactly how much would be needed to do that. And as you can see, all of the dollars are essentially allocated or planned for, and we're now right at 2/3 of dollars have been actually allocated. So if there's any area where you want to have a discussion and giving the governor latitude, and also because of the legislative provision that we don't have access to the final $400 million until September 15th, there are several things we can do in the last quarter or the last few months of the year easily, and that's one of them. There's no reason we need to do it today versus doing it on November 1st.
Thank you.
Okay, please continue.
Great. The judicial and legislative branches, that was something that you put forward in your bill, as it was one of the buckets to spend on the CARES Act money on, and the judicial branch has put forward applications, and we've allocated, they have the dollars that are over $7 million to fortify the judicial system so that they can continue to run trials and operate in this new COVID environment. And so that $7 million is there, and holding back some dollars. I believe there's an application in from LSO for about $250,000 for the costs that the legislative branch has incurred due to COVID. So that would take us close to the $8 million if that is the only amounts necessary for the year. And then I'll hit the state agencies COVID response.
Mr. Chairman?
Just a second, hold off, Randy. We got Representative Summers. Go ahead, Representative Summers.
Mr. Chairman, just quickly on the court technology. Obviously, we didn't fund quite a lot of court technology, so it wouldn't be supplanting what we already did. So is some of this going to actually help with their long-term vision as well as their short-term needs with COVID? So are they going to mesh, or are they completely separate sorts of things?
Go ahead.
I can answer that.
Mr. Chairman, yeah, thank you. Go ahead.
The answer is yes, it does.
Go ahead if you have the answer. Go ahead.
I did.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Okay. We're back to Rainey. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, state agencies and the COVID response within agencies. Some of these things, again, actually go right to what Representative Summers just said is we're dealing with some of the hazard pay for state employees and some other reimbursements. But that is an area where we're prioritizing other programs first. Believe, if Erica can correct me, but the allocation to state agencies so far is about $12 million. And for instance, about $1 million of that has gone to the Department of Corrections to install telehealth technology so that inmates do not have to be transferred and leave a prison to receive a checkup. We use the telehealth instead. And again, that is very responsive to COVID, but to Representative Summers' point, that also does, we believe, I think, help with the healthcare system within the prison in the long term. And depending on how long COVID is around, it will be an ongoing benefit and savings and also it helps protect people's health. So that's the state agencies. And then the last one is the healthcare system, and set out in state statute that wanted that program to be run through the State Loan and Investment Board again. So the hospitals, and many of you know this very well, Chairman Bebout, you sat through, I think, a very long day already to watch this process. But so those applications are coming in from the healthcare system. I believe there's $38 million already out to hospitals around the state, both public and private. And I believe I can grab that number for you. 25, it's $38 million total has been approved already, 25 to public hospitals and 12 to private hospitals. And so there's an additional 105, 5 of that would be for a mental health care program to respond to COVID and the impacts that's had on substance abuse and mental health. And then the rest of that money, the SLIB will consider an allocation model similar to what they're doing with locals for healthcare providers around the state, and voting again on if they should do an allocation type approach and then how that formula would work.
Yeah, the question I have on the rural healthcare hospitals is if in fact, you know, and of course it's all proposed, but we're looking at matches from the local people that are requesting money. And I get back to Riverton where clearly there's enough money, and, you know, we accept the responsibility of the amount of money we've asked for COVID funds if it's in fact later on denied. Yet, you know, SLIB chooses to vote no, and not getting into the dynamics of that vote, but just in general, if in fact, you know, different entities are willing and they've stepped up to say, we will accept the responsibility if an audit later on says that it's wrong, and yet you know, in the governor's recommendation, they don't consider that. Is there any kind of a broad policy where you're saying, even though somebody may step up and assume that responsibility, we think at the end of the day, the state may still have some obligations, so that's why we're taking a hard stance? Or is there any policy at all when we look at that type of a scenario? Did I make myself clear?
Mr. Chairman, I believe you did, and I wouldn't know if heard that concept come from other legislators as well. But at this point, the governor does not support the funding for new hospitals because it so clearly is not in alignment with the CARES Act at this time. Again, you know, already extended some risk, as many other states have, with programs like the broadband program. So I think the issue is that that they're right now in state law, you can't transfer that responsibility to a community or a hospital to take on that responsibility to pay dollars back. That falls squarely on the state, and you can't even pass it down right now to a county. So if anybody's on the hook, it's us, and it isn't so much that you have to pay it back. It would almost certainly be in a reduction in money we receive from the federal government coming in the future. So that the governor does believe we've taken some risk, as other states have, but at this point he remains concerned that that is not the path that we should go down. in terms of allocating money. The goal of this new allocation approach with the healthcare system is to get money out there so that the existing hospitals, long-term care facilities, assisted living, the at-home providers who are dealing with COVID and having to take precautions because of COVID, we fortify the existing entities. And again, that we start there, and we'll see what the SLIB does on the 27th to see if that's the path they want to go down.
Representative Summers.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And I'm not going to beat that dead horse, but I agree with Senator Bebout, obviously. But I do have a question on the mental health piece. So you were talking about some reimbursement for COVID in the mental health area. And I believe that's what I heard. And so I'm wondering if that's going to just be centered on a few large institutions. Are you going to try to actually get out in rural Wyoming and help relieve some of the impacts that local mental health providers have had as it relates to COVID, or more cases after COVID has hit? So speak a little bit to that.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And, again, on the healthcare facilities and having lots of conversations with you, Representative Summers, and hearing Chairman Bebout's thoughts, the governor does feel strongly that the MRG program as it currently exists is going to be a means as we go forward to help those hospitals that we can, that where they're needed and where there's that local skin in the game. So there are other discussions to be had on that front. For mental health, we haven't finalized that program. So we've been in touch. Definitely the Joint Labor Health Committee meets later this week. We'll probably get some additional input from them. But as we're looking at that in terms of where to go, it certainly isn't to just help a few institutions. It's to make sure, if we can, that there is actually more mental health services available to people across the state as a result of that program, not just to go to the institutions themselves, but to see if there is anything we can do so that there are the providers that are out there that maybe are taking on additional patients, that they're being compensated for that, or if we can work to improve our system so that more healthcare is, mental health care in particular, is available. One thing that we've been able to do is license more practitioners through the telehealth system over the last few months, so that there are additional providers in Wyoming, and worked with the boards on some emergency rules so that we could be more nimble and bring in a few more people, at least temporarily, to provide mental health care, in particular, and substance use disorders as well.
Okay. Any other questions? Let's continue.
Mr. Chairman, that is the plan for the 1.25. And so again, just let people know that is available to be reviewed on the website, Wyoming Sense. And there are details about what has been allocated already that Ms. Legursky could walk you through now. But appreciate the opportunity to speak with you. And again, appreciate all the input that has come in. For example, on the agricultural business relief program, that's something we've heard a lot of input from legislators from around the state, and do feel like we really benefited from the broadband task force to get us to where we are, and the Wyoming's Tomorrow task force as well.
Representative Summers.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And I hate to belabor this, and I probably missed it, Rennie, but we haven't allocated, as you said, 400 million. I forget the date. Somebody can remind me. The date is September what?
15th.
15th. Thank you. So, if we come back in before September 15th and allocate that 400 million, what is going to drop off of your 1.25 billion list? In other words, you've already allocated that we haven't really, in a sense, you've kind of already modeled, let's put it that way, because it's not really allocated yet, but you've modeled the spend on that 400 million. So if we don't cough up the 400 million, what's in, what's out on your list?
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, if if Mr. Richards wants to flip back to the allocation slide, the total allocation as of August 17th, that might help you a little bit look at this. So as we said, there's 427 million set aside for economic relief. The 100 that will be gone before September 15th, I would almost assume completely. There's $100 million for the agricultural relief program that is not spent. There is no program for that today. Education resilience, 150 has already been allocated and is out to schools and higher education. So there's only 25 million available out of that. The broadband, again, their applications were 86 million. So we looking to see if there's anything else to do on that program. The testing and contact tracing, we have $60 million. I think the governor would feel very strongly that we don't want to take away money from future contact tracing that might be needed, especially if this does carry forward into the end of the year or beyond. The unemployment workers' compensation, there's $42 million, but it has not been has not been B11 into that trust fund yet. The local governments is an area where that program is getting stood up to allocate the 200 million to cities, towns, and counties. Only 44 million, 43.6 has gone out. And again, for the healthcare system, $38 million is out the door out of 105. The eviction prevention and support program, that 16 million, 15 million or $16 million. There's 15 at WCDA for evictions and $1 million at DFS for food security programs. So the WCDA is not spending at that rate. So there's some money there. And state agencies, again, we're just over $12 million allocated at this time. So as we look at how the year would end, there might be something there. But I guess that would give you some sense as to where there are things. The biggest pot of money is the agricultural business relief program at $100 million. And then beyond that, it would be local governments. But if you all share that goal that we want to get the 25% allocated to downstream governments, that's part of the goal of spending the $200 million on local governments.
So,
Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Just a quick follow-up. Thank you for that, Rennie. And I didn't really mean to put you on the spot, but I did. I think it's a reminder to the committee that we have legislation that is passed where we still have control of 400 million if we so choose. So I think it is, regardless of the charts and the graphs, we still have, and I appreciate the charts and the graphs, but that still is under our control if we so choose to do it. Thank you.
Well, and very good point, Representative Summers, and it certainly is under our purview. And of course, I, like many of you, really wants the legislature involved to the maximum we can be in how we allocate these funds. And of course, that talks about maybe whether there'll be a special session or not. Rennie, appreciate your input. The thing that I would ask that you share with the governor, a lot of us have, we like the information. We appreciate his efforts to put this money out. We have some differences, and I know you're paying attention to what we're saying in some of the areas we feel like money should be spent that may not show up on the governor's, list. And I hope that he would consider that and work with us, whether or not we have a special session, to try to implement some of this, because at the end of the day, we all want what's best for Wyoming. We all want to utilize to the maximum extent we can these COVID funds. And whether it's at the university looking at the law school, or whether it's a hospital in Pinedale or Saratoga or Riverton, whatever it is, that we're working together to get the final solution to do the best we can with these COVID funds. So thank you for that. And I guess on our schedule now, we move to Erica. Is that correct? To look at the allocations? Nobody's saying any. Erica, you ready? Are you next?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I can do that.
Okay.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, Erica Ligursky, Policy Advisor for Governor Gordon. Don, if you'd like to go to the slide that says the total allocation for 817. Rennie has gone over a little bit of this, so I'll just kind of go over this quickly. This is out on the Wyoming Sense website, so it'll show the 797 million that we've allocated. In those discussions that we have had with Rennie and where Rennie has talked right now, 327 million has been allocated to local and economic relief. Where that has gone is we've had a little over 325 million that has gone to the Business Council. We've given them the entire amount of money for that economic and business relief program. So you will see in the Wolf system and from some of those graphs that you've been given from Don Richards that they've spent 100 million of that. They have the remaining 225 million to use for programs 2 and 3. And so what we did is we gave them that money because it was allocated through the session, and we wanted to make sure that they had that easily available once they approve those grants to those businesses to get that out quickly. So they actually have that whole 325 million that is sitting over at the Business Council right now. For the education resilience, Rennie had mentioned that 150 million is out the door. 46 million has gone to the University of Wyoming. That was for their original plan of the 26 million that had gone out for their reopening. The 20 million is similar to the legislation that you guys had talked about today. And that's 20 million going out to students who had been affected by COVID related issues. And that is based on for food security and tuition. Community colleges is the same way. They have had some additional funding. They had the 20 million that was similar to the program that we had talked about earlier. They have also had some money that has been given to them for telework type projects, for PPE. And then they also were given the 7.5 million that they're going to be working with the university and also some trade schools for the adult education. That's the 7.5 million. K through 12 schools have been given the 51 million, and that is for their reopening plan for PPE and also for some distance learning, virtual education, and to get them ready to reopen. The broadband infrastructure that you'll see, we had talked about, Rennie had mentioned that's where the 86 million is. We actually have transferred the entire 100 million over to the Business Council. So that's where that money is sitting right now, is at the Business Council with that 100 million. The testing and contact tracing, we have gone over that. We have 60 million that's allotted to them. Also, you can see on there, I think within that health plan, we have 100 million. Part of that would be to, depending on how long this goes, if there's more testing, contact tracing, vaccinations, that's where that money is slated to go for the testing and contact tracing. On that, you'll see if you look at the Wolf's information that you're getting from Dawn, it looks a little skewed on there that they haven't gotten a lot of those funds out. Our understanding is that the Department of Health has a lot of contracts that they have already signed for the testing and contact tracing, but a lot of those contracts are going to be payable at the very end. So that's one of those things that now that we've gotten kind of the plan and we've gotten this money out to these agencies, that we'll be working with those agencies just to try and figure out the timing of when those payments are going to be going out. So that looks a little skewed when you look at those Wolf's reports. Rennie went over kind of in depth with the unemployment and workers' comp. We have allocated to them right now the 42 million. We're holding 25 for the UI rate stabilization, the 16 million from the premium credit repayment. We're working closely with them to make sure and see how that figure fluctuates. It's gone up a little bit, but as Rennie said, we're not seeing huge increases and spikes in some of those numbers. The Workforce Services does have the money for the implementation of the 750,000 for the internship program. When we get to local governments, we have the OSLI program. From what was approved at the last meeting, we had given OSLI and kind of upfront 25 million. Those had come in at 28,413 from their last grouping. So we went ahead and we're getting ready to transfer that additional 3.4 million over to them. Airport capacity, I think we talked about last time, we have the 4.1 million that went to local airports. Childcare assistance, we had money that went to DFS, 4.1 million. This is to help with childcare facilities who ran into some issues where parents have either been laid off, kind of assisting those parents as well if they have been laid off, but they wanted to then keep their spot at the daycare and we're still having to pay. So this is some assistance there. And then the mental health, we have the 1.2 million. We had talked a little bit about that. Rennie had mentioned that $1 million that went for mental health went to local providers to help assisting for parents for evaluation for mental health and substance abuse. And then we've had the 5.7 million that has gone out for tourism and to state parks. That's helping with cleaning, PPE. It's also going for locals. There's going to be kind of a pass through from the tourism department down to locals for some media releases to try and encourage safe travels in their communities. Don, if you wouldn't mind going to the next page. On this page, we had talked about, and Rennie had alluded to this a little bit as well, this is the healthcare program. OSLI, within that program, we had 25.8 million that went to public hospitals, and there was 12.1 million that was approved for SLIP to go to private hospitals. The food eviction program, this is one area where when we're talking about the plan where there could be some money that is changing. We did 15 million to WCDA. We do know that the
Erica, on the 12 million with the private hospitals, is that only for private corporations, or is there another definition that you're using? That seems to be high to go in for, you know, what happens in Fremont County. Is there something I'm missing in what you call private hospitals?
Mr. Chairman, so in looking at that, when I'm talking about private hospitals, those would be things like Cheyenne Regional Medical Center, Riverton Memorial, Teton. Those are the hospitals that those fundings went to.
So it's more than just the two quote private hospitals in Fremont County. It's others that are considered private in your definition. Okay.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Continue.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So then on here for the WCDA program, as you may be well aware that they have revamped some of their rules that they had in order to try and get more participation. It does seem that they have had some increased participation. They were looking around, 62 applications per week. They've had 87 applications since they've done the change in the program. They have had, this is where it is a little skewed, and Rennie had alluded to, we have 15 million that we've given to them. About 450,000 is what's been given out in that program. We're hoping over the next month to see an increase in those numbers for people who are applying for that program. We do know that with the expiration of the $600 a week, that will probably drive more people to that program. I have also talked to, as well as WCDA has talked to, some private nonprofits that have been actually giving assistance to those individuals, and they're trying to get them to, as those private institutions are kind of running out of funding and support for those, we've encouraged them to try and push them towards that WCDA program. And also, Mr. Chairman, last time we had talked, there was a discrepancy, I think, between the administrative costs for what you had and what I had on there. It's looking like around right now that there's 144,000 that's been in administrative costs. After doing some research, and WCDA has done some discussions within their office, there are some things that they're going to scale back from that. They had some of their administrative costs that they were using included in that figure. Those are going to be reduced. And so it's going to be close to about a 16% administrative burden on there, which will be closer to 83,000 versus the 144,000. 33,000 of that was the initial startup cost of the program. So as this program goes on, those administrative costs will be going down. So we're hoping that that'll average out a little bit more. And then if we can get some of these individuals who are using other nonprofit resources to get this funding, if we can get them geared towards this WCDO program, that will help with that number as well. For agency response, we had talked about telework, employees assistance, 235,000's gone out. We've also done 6.1 million for sanitation for public buildings and offices, and then hazard pay for the 6 million. With that hazard pay, we've been working closely with the AG's office and agencies to make sure that those individuals who were receiving hazard pay were, truly mitigated to either responding or mitigating the COVID response. So we've had a lot of back and forth. So my apologies, that's taken a little while. My understanding is before the end of the week is out, we should have those agencies who've been paying hazard pay should be reimbursed for that. And this first payment that's going out is roughly around 2.8 million. And then Rennie had alluded to also the judicial grants of the 7 million that had gone out for PPE and technology. Dawn, if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide, if there's no questions on that. This is just a screenshot, just so that you guys could see this. This is what is on Wyoming Sense. So if you're more visual and graphs with percentages, this is how that 797 million has been out kind of as a visual graph. Next slide. This is one of the things that we just wanted to show you as we're tracking, and I did send this to the LSO staff. We have on here the amount that was allocated through the plan, which is that first column that you'll see where we have the 100 million for broadband. We have allocated and given out to the Business Council that entire 100 million. And so that will show you that for that allocation, we are either under or over allocated for that. With the Economic and Business Relief Program, we have allocated 527 million to that. We had just discussed that there's 327 million that's already gone out the door that's at the Business Council, and there's 110 million that's kind of left over, if you will. We know that 100 of that is going to go for the Ag Relief Program that we're currently looking at. There was also an additional request that we're waiting back for some information for a little over $9 million for some Ag Food Security program in there. So that's kind of where we get to that over allocated of that 10.6, is by looking at some of those things that are kind of miscellaneous requests that have been outside of those larger requests that we have had. You can see on here, I'll just kind of skip down to evictions and food security. We had allocated 15 million. We do think that there is some room within WCDA where they're not going to get to that entire amount. So that's where we've allocated $1 million to the food security program. We believe that there'll be some excess money in the WCDA program that they're not going to get to that entire 15 that we can then bring back and redeploy elsewhere. We had talked about the healthcare program. Rennie alluded to that we were looking at a direct distribution model in conjunction with what has been allocated also from the SLIB board. That program would also go through SLIB, but that's 105 million. Included in there also, we are looking at, and also in conjunction with the eviction and food security program, if we did do some shifts in allocations where we could possibly get some more out to healthcare, or excuse me, mental health in that area. And then you can see down here for testing and contact tracing, we have the 60 million allocated to them. We've got 20 million set aside to get them to that 100 million. And so we do have probably about 20 more million based on that allocation to get them to that 100. So that's just kind of how that sheet works out. And you can see kind of where we're under and over allocated, and how this is just very fluid as we're moving through this. I have, if there's no questions on that, I have one more. It's kind of just
before you leave that, hold on a second. Any other questions that of Erica? Yeah, go ahead, Representative Summers.
So, Mr. Chairman, thank you. And Erica, thank you for that. And I guess it's not so much a question as a comment, but it's really back to what I brought, what I said to Rennie is, back to the matter is there's still $400 million that is not released to the governor right now. That is still our ability to do with what we want. And what we want within reason, because he could obviously veto, and we could do all that. And so just talk a little bit about what are your priorities. So as you think about whether we have priorities too, and some of those we have melded, right? We've done a pretty good job, I think, of melding legislative and governor priorities together. But as we go down the final leg here, how do we ensure that both of our priorities kind of move forward, so we don't end up at a loggerhead at the end?
Go ahead, Erica.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. And Rennie, pipe in on here as well too. I'm thinking some of our main focus on this would be definitely, the testing and contact tracing. Are we getting that information and the resources that we need out to the Department of Health, and also the local, county health officers that we need for that? I do think that we need to make sure that the healthcare and the hospitals have the information and the resources that they need as well. I would say another one that we worked on really closely would be education, and making sure that our schools are safe for those kids to return to. So those would be the top three.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Senator Guru.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Eric, on the last slide, this allocation as of age 17, set aside the remaining funds over allocated. Just want to make sure I understand it. You B11 this money over to that was how it allocated. Is that how that got done?
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Erica.
Yes. So for the figure that I have right here is the 797 million. What that money is right now is it has gone through the entire process. The governor's office has approved it. We've had sign off from, after the AG reviewed it, she's given her comments on that. So as of right now, if you're trying to compare this back to what is on the budget website for the B11, 687.2 million has actually been B11 to the agencies. And that's what is sitting in those agencies for them to utilize. There's another 110 million that has been what we would call kind of waiting for the B11. And what I mean by that is I'll use the education resilience as a example. So for that education resilience, the governor had approved, and we had also, it had gone entirely through the process to approve 25 million to each of the community colleges and also to the University of Wyoming for the program similar to what you guys were talking about today, for the tuition and food assistance program for those students who'd been affected by COVID-19. We have actually B11'd to the community colleges 20 million of that money. We know that we've told them that they can have 25 million. We've given them 20 million. We're going to see how the program goes and what the response is for that program. If it is well accepted and there needs to be more money to go to that program, we know that we can B11 that additional 5 million over to them. So that's kind of where that awaiting B11, if you will, conversation would come in, where you get the additional 110 million. So that's why I've plotted on the report the 797 million, is because we are fairly confident that entire pot of money is going to move over to the university and the community colleges.
Okay.
Follow up. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Okay, 687 has been B11 so far, 110 are in process. Out of that 687 million, and I understand what's gone out of the business council, I understand those parts. Out of that 687 million, how much has gone out the door? Do you have an idea?
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
So, Senator Greer, that's where this little disconnect is. If you look at the Wolf's reports, it says it's around 180 million that has gone out the door. So we know that we have B11'd the 325 million to the business council for all of their programs that were in that legislation of the 325 million. We know that through the process and working through them at this point in time that they have only sent out the door 100 million. So there's a reconciliation that needs to be done, that is done there, and that we're looking at to see. So you could say that the business council has 225 million that they have not sent out the door yet, but we do know that through the approvals that they have just done, and Rennie had said that there were some checks that were going to be cut today, that money is going to be drawn down.
Okay, I still don't know if I got my question answered though, as far as I know the 325, I know 100's gone out. I know there's 225 in the pot. I know they're going through all the numbers, but no, I'm talking about the rest of it. All those line items that are on that slide, and it says allocation, that says set aside the remaining funds from previous allocations, then over and under allocate. My point is that virtually all of those numbers are theoretical at this point in time, correct?
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I wouldn't say all of those numbers are, I guess, are theoretical if we wanted to adjust those programs. So, for example, with the food eviction and food security with WCDA is the 15 million. We know that we have given WCDA the 15 million. We know that they're not going to use that entire amount of that money. So that's where that -11 is coming in. So they've actually been given the money. It's just not been sent out the door.
Okay, and that one I have. Okay, I'm just trying to find out which ones are and which ones seem to be more placeholder-like. Thank you. Thank you.
Sorry.
Okay, I got you. Okay.
Anything else, Erica?
Mr. Chairman, the only thing that I had, if you would like me to, is just to talk about the 312.5 million that would go out for the allocation down to downstream governments if we were to, and what we would use to make up that number.
We've had a lot of discussion about that. Can you add to what we've heard?
Yep, I think it's just exactly what you heard. So what we were accounting for that, Mr. Chairman, was the OSLI program of the 200 million. We could account for some of the public health money that went out, that 25.8 million, the air capacity agreement of 4 million, money that went to downstream tourism of 5.4, and then the community colleges and K through 12. So with what we've allocated thus far, either have physically sent out to them or what we are allocating within those buckets, we would be over the 312.5 million should that Congress pass that new legislation.
Okay, thank you for that. And I think what we need to do, and Don is still on with us too, Erica, is obviously we have in place some different things we legislatively would like to see the money spent. You know, we've got different committee work under ag with ag money, although your dollar amount's way higher than I think the ag committee, but certainly travel and rec is way higher than what you're thinking about for tourism related issues. We've got rural hospitals. It'd be nice to see a kind of a reconciliation, and it's going to be kind of hard because they're moving numbers. But Don and Eric, if you could see, here's the governor, he's allocated 797, you know, but here's how we're going to spend 1.25 billion. Here's what the legislature would like to do. We got the 400 million still out there, just to get away in a sense of the major differences we have. And I don't know any better way to do it than some kind of a 1 or 2 page deal like that. Don, Erica, what do you think of that idea? Mr. Co-Chair, you as well, jump in. It should be nice to see where we're off and where we have these differences. Go ahead, Don.
Mr. Chairman, I think those are outlined on page 3 of Tamara's memo from earlier today. It's actually table 3, and you can see the differences are.
Yeah, but I looked at that and I didn't think we had everything in there, but maybe it is. Okay, maybe I just quickly glanced over it. So we do have the number, and you think that's inclusive, Don, right?
I believe that is.
And Erica, have you had a chance to review that as well? You're still on mute.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I have looked at that, but if there's some additional information that you would like me to work with Don, I'd be happy to either break it down in our buckets or provide you additional information on that.
No, and I guess I overlooked that part when I glanced through it. So I just want to be sure we really know where we are, and as we move forward, if we have a special session, if we don't, you know, what the legislature would really like to see. And I think that's pretty important, Erica and Rennie, that you take back to the governor our strong feelings about different issues. I see several hands going up. I'll recognize the co-chairman, then get to you, Senator Grew. Go ahead, Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. Erica, I mean, after looking at our Schedule 3 and that report, do you find it accurate, or things we left out? And which are there some of those that are kind of cross-pollinate, because it's 1 I think 8 billion in total versus the 1.26 when you combine everything. And so how I mean, do you see it in the same numbers, or do you have a different perspective?
Go ahead, Erica.
Mr. Chairman, when I look at this, I guess I'm looking at more of all of the buckets. So I do think that what's on table 3, I think for that looked fairly accurate for where we were looking. But as we kind of shown on the other sheet, that there are some other buckets that are either under or over allocated. So I don't know if that would be helpful if we did maybe all of the buckets versus just some of them.
Well, and you know, we're only the JAC, and of course, we're talking a couple representatives of the governor's staff. We have a whole bunch of other members of the legislature have their own ideas too. So once again, I would just echo my thoughts is to try to see where we are different and see how we can move in a direction that we kind of come up with things we can agree with. This is something we got to do, and I would hate to get into real loggerheads over the executive branch and legislative branch. And obviously, I'm going to be speaking very strongly for the legislative branch. So with that, Senator Grew, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One last question about, and thank you, Erica, by the way, for all of this. I do appreciate it. But I wanted just to get a little sense, since we talked a lot about this in our committee, the judicial branch, and was mostly technical, was technology related. Can you expand on that? You don't have to, even if you want to just do something offline, that's fine. But if you have it at the top of your head, it'd be great. What did that entail? What are we off the hook on?
Go ahead if you can, Erica.
Mr. Chairman, yeah, I can tell you what we had that was in there. So what they had looked at doing in there was that the in courts might be engaging some additional judges who maybe have retired to come back and help with some cases and caseload. It was for PPE, for mask sanitizer, gloves, equipment to conduct proceedings remotely. There was some information in there about some underlying infrastructure to the courts and the technology that they had. Also was for some licensing and some electronic signature type of applications. And then reopening the businesses safely and doing some pre-screening. So those are the types of items that were in there.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Erica, for that hard work you've done, and appreciate those comments. Don, as I look at the schedule, we now have Kevin as our next item. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, that is correct.
Okay. What I want to do is take about a 10-minute break, and we'll come back. And is that not the last item on our agenda?
That's right.
Okay, before we take the break, committee, anything else you'd like to mention before we break? Okay, what time is it now? Oh, wait a second, Representative Summers, go ahead.
You know, Mr. Chairman, and it's above my pay grade, but it's still something I think we should consider as we kind of roll down this final path of spending these CARES Act, and we look at our legislative priorities and the governor's priorities, much of them the same. I'm wondering if there's a process we could create that, whether it's a work group or whatever, that we start kind of honing in on some of this, and whether it's our staff works with his staff, whatever. I mean, ultimately it's going to become policy decisions, but I think it's really imperative that we both come together and that we both recognize each other's desires in this process. And otherwise, you know, if you do go to a special session, then you got to fight that out, and then it's uglier, right? And it's less productive. So I'm just looking and I look to my co-chairs and have them just keep that in the back of their head, and as well as Erica and the Gov's office, Rennie, if there's a work solution for this. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you for that, Representative Summers. Mr. Co-Chairman, you can chime in. I think that, you know, all committees are working hard on this. Probably the most involvement could very well be the JAC. I don't know if other members of the legislature would agree with that or not, but certainly I think we're probably the most heavily involved in how we could facilitate that. But also, you know, that's a discussion between leadership and the governor as well. So, Bob, whatever you think, boy, the more involvement the JAC has, I think we have a better work product at the end and a better understanding of what we want. But Bob, do you have any comments, Mr. Co-Chair?
I would just concur with Representative Summers and you that it's something that we need to focus on in the next couple of weeks and work with Erica and Rennie to make sure we're kind of on this, as close to being on the same page as we can.
Well, let's do this. Maybe Rennie and Erica could take this message back to the governor, our commitment to work with him. We've been saying it all along. And then maybe, Mr. Co-Chair, you and I could visit, even if we have to have another quick Zoom with the committee to see how we proceed, to be sure that we try to get to that same end number. The sooner the better, where we try to agree on. So let's leave it at that. And maybe Rennie and Eric, you could take that message to the governor and get back to us, you know, in a reasonable amount of time, like this afternoon. No, but as soon as makes sense, and then we can proceed to have that discussion. I think it's very, very important. Any members of the committee have any input on that, what your thoughts are? Any senators agree or disagree with that? I see thumbs up. I don't see Senator Hicks still on the phone, but hopefully Senator Hicks would agree with that as well. So Bob, let's, what's today is Wednesday. Oh, Rennie and Erica, get back to us maybe by the end of the week if you could. Is that too tough? And let us know what you think, and then we could facilitate this and move forward. Would that work? We don't want to push you. It's a lot going on, but what are your thoughts? Would that make sense? How about a thumbs up? There we go. Okay, with that, what time do we have? It's about what, Don? I got 3:31. Let's come back at 3:45 for the last part of our discussion today. Does that work for everybody? Okay, we'll recess until 3:45. Thank you. So Larry, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Eli.
You're there, Eli.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Guys. Okay, well, we're going to start up in a little bit. Anyway, did I mention bear when I had my mic unmuted? Did I say here that there's a bear or anything? Did I say that?
I don't think so.
Okay,
I
well,
don't think so.
I remember saying
So,
about the bear.
Mr. Chairman, you are live on YouTube. They have not shut it off over the break.
Oh, we're still live? Okay. Never mind and forget what I just said about the bear. How come we don't shut it off during break? We should do that.
Did you say Larson's as crabby as a bear?
Can you shut off the YouTube and get us back on pretty easily, Don?
Mr. Chairman, the reason why we don't stop it over those breaks is because it creates additional audio video files on the website. So we do try and constrain it to one video in the morning and one video in the afternoon so that the public does understand exactly where their meetings are going to be posted.
So Eli, I think the bear comment was when you were talking with me on the phone.
Okay, never mind. And it's almost time to get started here. So we'll get everybody on board and we'll go to Kevin. Kevin, you got that normal, I'm happier than I've ever been looked. Oh, there's a smile. We were waiting for it. I knew it was there. I heard something about you that was a positive comment, really, and I didn't realize it, and we'll talk later because we're on YouTube. It has nothing to do with legislative or anything in your current capacity. Just a personal conversation I'll have with you. Good stuff.
Those are always welcome.
Okay, it's 3:46. We're going to call the meeting back to order. And the next item on our agenda is Kevin's going to tell us about the proposed 10% reductions of the governor and where we are with that and what's going on. So Kevin, we'll see you again. And go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Kevin Hibbert. I'm the Director of the State Budget Department. I'd like to start off by thanking the Joint Appropriations Committee for the 2 letters that you delivered to us. It was helpful for us to get the process right and get it done correctly the first time, particularly the August 3rd letter where you laid out what your expectations were for the reports. And we have that completed even with the identifications of the one-time versus the ongoing funds. That's helpful, and you will appreciate the process that we have. You'll like it when you see it. The budget books will be published just like they are when we submit the budgets from the governor to the legislature. So you'll see them in each agency. They'll be fully reconciled. They'll have the exception step 2 priority tables, and you'll have the narratives as well. And it'll be by agency. This is different than it was in 2016. Actually, we wrestled with 2016 all the way into November 18th of 2016. You'll see these will be fully reconciled and be able to go from book to book, and we'll have summaries as well. I'll work with Don a little bit here in the next week and perhaps the chairs to make sure that you're seeing the summaries in the fashion that you'd like to see them. We would have liked to have had this all accomplished. We strove to do so that we could have this conversation today. We were not able to fully complete all the agencies, but we're hopeful to get it done sooner than later. I'm more energized to get it finished. It's been a very significant expenditure of everybody's time. We want to get it wrapped up and get it delivered to you as soon as possible. Currently, what we're wrestling with is just finalizing positions. You'll be pleased with the position counts when you see them, but we want to make sure that we get it all accomplished correctly. So with that, I'd certainly answer any questions And I know that you'll have plenty of questions when the books gets published.
Representative Larson, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Kevin, you make me nervous. My grandma says, I know you'll like cream spinach. And I just never did. And so when you tell me I'm going to like it, can you give us some ideas of why you say that? And can you give us an idea of when we'll start seeing that? Does it, and do we have to have it all at once, or can you give us an agency at a time? And will this reduction then be structurally moving forward? Is that your intent, that moving forward through the next several bienniums, that this is kind of the baseline, at least at this point, for direction of your budget requests?
Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead.
I was careful in the choice of my words. I said you would appreciate the process.
Okay.
You know, we're certainly going to have differences of opinions on what the reductions are, but it's important to understand that this will be a phased-in approach. We'll show you the step 2, and it'll be enterprise-wide. We have the same responsibility like LSO will have when they're building the profile. We're going to show you all the books at once. You'll get it. Everybody will get the same delivery at the same time. I am under a Freedom of Information request to publish this, so everybody will get it at the same time. But the process is basic. We have columns and I-bars, and in the reports that you'll see the tables, you'll see the narratives, you'll see the adjustments, you'll see the positions. And each one of those columns, so we'll have a column for here's the current budget as appropriated by the legislature. You'll see the column, here's the step 2 reductions. Then you'll see another column, and then finally you'll see a column that will say the supplemental, because we still have to go through the whole supplemental process. That will be all rolled up in the same fashion when we deliver it to you on the 3rd Monday of November. So what we've done here is we've created a budget in its entirety, just like we would normally submit to you with narratives and everything, just like we would normally do in a normal budget presentation from the governor.
Representative Summers, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And thank you, Kevin. I can't imagine what a load that's been on you and your staff. So, you know, as we ask questions, make no mistake, we understand the lift that you're doing. And so a question I have for you is, okay, this is 10%, right? This is 10% of a 33% perhaps problem, maybe. I don't know what the number is now. And so, and I know we've talked in the media and we've talked in campaigns and as candidates about how we're going to solve this problem. But one thing that you all have committed to as well is what's the next 10% look like, 20%. So that's what I want to know is where and when do we see the 20%? And what does it look like? And because I think until the public can see some of this stuff, and I don't even know if that's going to phase us as a society, but until we can see some of this stuff, it's not real. And so my question to you, back to you is, okay, great. I'm glad you've done a great job. Now the next 10%, when can we see that?
Go ahead, Kevin.
Mr. Chairman.
One thing too, to add on to that is, I thought I heard you say we won't see anything till November 3rd. I think
Mr. Chairman.
About explain that. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, Representative Summers. I appreciate it. This has been an extensive lift. And one of the things that we've been focused on from the very beginning is when we hand this over to LSO, that it is in a professional format to where they can work with you and the legislature to make the changes, and the numbers are there and consistent for you. And I think that behooves us all, and it'll eventually prove itself out. Mr. Chairman, when I said the 3rd Monday of November, that's the process of going from step 2, the first 10%, step 3, and then a supplemental, because we still have the supplemental, and that it'll all be in the same document, but it'll be matured as each step progresses into that supplemental document, so where you'll have it all in the same place and be able to administer to it as we have in the past with the budgets. So our focus now is to get step 2 complete, get it out to you. And then what we'll do is we'll continue to work towards identifying step 3. It's important to understand, and from the very beginning, when we were speaking to leadership and the Joint Appropriations Committee when I last spoke, our focus is to manage the duration of COVID. We know that the duration is finite. We also know that we do not expect to have the kind of revenue that we had going into COVID that we will when we come out of COVID. So there is an expectation. So to get to where we can focus, where we don't have to do this iteration again when we approach 23, 24, so that we can get there and be back to some semblance of normalcy. And then obviously, the most important thing I believe that I've shared with the audience, and I've had several questions on this from members, would be that when you get the budget submitted to you, the legislature are the appropriators. Just like in 2016, there were things that the administration wanted, and there was things that the legislature wanted, and things were removed, adjusted, and modified. You know, that's the process that we'll have, and hopefully when we get it to you on the 3rd week of November, it's professional and it's in a place of where you've normally worked. I want you to be able to look at this from the perspective of, here's how you've always seen these budgets. You've seen them in budget books, and we want you to be able to work on that platform rather than creating a new one.
Okay, I've got some questions, but go ahead, Representative Summers, then we'll get to Representative Kenner. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a follow up. So Kevin, I'm going to press you harder. So are we going to see your recommendations for a 20% reduction ever? And that's, I mean, ever. And the reason I'm saying that is if it has taken you all, and I know it's hard, to move this mountain 10%, then when we go into
hold on a second, Albert. Larry, Senator Hicks, mute your mic, would you please? Go ahead, Senator Representative Summers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think Senator Kinski's got his mic open, but so Kevin, we go into
I'm muted on my phone.
So Kevin,
go ahead, Representative Summers.
So Mr. Chairman, Kevin, so if we go into another session, are we going to have the other 10% laid out for us if that's something we choose to do? And the reason I ask this is we can cut about any amount we have to, but we're not going to know as well as the administration is going to know after going through this. And I know we'll see priorities of agencies, right? But priorities of agencies are not necessarily priorities of an entire administration. So you have a priority of agency A, the highest priority, and the highest priority of agency B. That doesn't mean that A is the highest priority of the state of Wyoming. And I know in the end it's our decision, but you all look at this budget and it's your agencies to examine it. So once again, when are we going to see the 20%?
Go ahead, Kevin.
Mr. Chairman, on the front end of this is the question about, it took us this long to get to step 2, and a lot of that is to get the process right, get it in place. Now we have that process, and everybody's educated, everybody understands, and we're moving forward. It will not be that big of an issue to turn this around for step 3. Step 3 is going to be available. We're going to have the agencies provide us what the consequences of step 3, and naturally we're going to mature this process with the normal process of the CRAG. What takes place between now and October needs to be in focus for the next iteration. I'm convinced that step 2 for the first 10% is a necessity for us to be in place for 23-24. And we will work on step 3 for the proposals of what we'll need to do if the duration of COVID gets extended or deepens. But we want to make sure that we work this in concert with the normal process of the Craig update. We'll be meeting in September, and we'll also be having the October Craig.
You mentioned that you're talking about the 23-24 budget.
Right. The 10%, I believe, is going to be an absolute necessity for us not to have ourselves in the same position when we go into 23-24.
Okay, so yeah, you're not worried about only implementing it for 23-24. You're going to do that now. I misunderstood what you said.
Right.
And so
These are.
When will we see that 10% number? I think that's the part I'm missing. When will we actually see that so we can comment on what we think about where the reductions are? When will we see that?
Very soon. Right now, what we're working on are positions and doing a final reconciliation for a couple of agencies. I would say that we are on the 99th percentile. We're trying to wrap up the last 1% and get that out and get that done. And I'm motivated to get it done. I'd like to get it done next week. But if there's something that presents an issue with us, then we might be later than that. But we want to get this first 10% to you and everybody else as soon as possible.
Go ahead, Reverend Kinner. I know you got a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Kevin. And really, it might just be a follow-up to that question, Mr. Chairman's. So in visiting with a couple of our large nonprofits recently, I said, so how's it going? And they said, well, we're waiting to hear from the state in terms of the budget reductions and cuts. So is that what you're talking about, is getting that information out to them at the same time? I guess that's what I'm wondering about. Thank you.
Correct. When we publish this, everybody's going to get it at the same time. I've have a public records request, and they've been very kind and understanding. And we want to make sure that these members of the press have access to this information at the same time that everybody else does. So we'll publish the whole thing all together, all at once.
One question, so publishing it, understanding it, seeing it, the more important question is, because of the cost of money, when will it be implemented? What's your target setup date to start it? Because, the longer we wait, the more it's going to cost us. And then I'll get Representative Summers. You got a question that ties into all this. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman.
That's
a very good question of when we're implementing this. This is implemented as of July 1st. All the statistics that you will receive will be on the biennium basis. The positions will be taken on a biennium basis. Every cut's going to be there, and we'll identify what one time is as well. But this is all July 1st effective, and the agencies know and understand that.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Representative Summers.
So, Mr. Chairman and Kevin, I'm going to press again. So phase 3 is phase 3, the 20% cut, the outlining the next 10%. Is that phase 3? And then what I thought I heard you say was that we don't have to worry about whether we cut any more beyond 10%, that we can live off of a 10% cut until we have to go into a 23-24 budget. Is that what I'm hearing?
Mr. Chairman, no. What I said is this, is that we believe that going into COVID and coming out of COVID, we cannot expect to have the same amount of revenue. We know that we're battling a duration of this finite COVID impact. We believe that we need at least 10% so that we're not in a situation where we're doing the same exercise in 23-24. We're preparing step 3 for the duration, and also in comparison with what the Craig does in October, so that we are prepared with proposals for what we would need to do if the duration longers or steepens.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
And I'll promise I'll quit soon. But Kevin, and I know you're good at dancing on this thing, but I don't understand that. So maybe it's just the lateness of the day, and I've been in a long meeting with numbers. But when I heard you again, it sounded to me like 10% is going to be just fine unless COVID worsens or deepens. So that makes me think that the world is fine with a 10% cut unless things get worse than they are now, even though under the most optimistic revenue forecast, we go down over $1 billion in revenue. So I'm struggling to understand what that worsens or deepens, and I still haven't heard of what an explanation of what phase 3 is.
So, Mr. Chairman, I would phrase this is that we're going to do 10%. This is coming, and this is step 2. And you're going to see those proposals and the governor's recommendations, and those are going to be presented to you in a budget book. Once we get step 2 completed, then the agencies have been requested to provide us proposals for step 3, and we will work those proposals in concert with what we see in revenue between now and October. We know that, for example, the general fund, we didn't change our profile. We're still looking at the May Craig. We call it the July pacing report, healed up the general fund by 117 million. We're going to prepare ourselves with step 3 for proposals for what takes place after step 2. But step 2, we're going to hand to you as soon as possible, the first 10%.
You get any more questions on any of that, Representative Summers?
Mr.
The other
Chairman,
thing, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I think it's getting more clear to me now.
The other thing too, Kevin, is when we talk about it, you know, and 20%, if you look at even with our most optimistic look at our revenue picture, unless we're just going to spend all of LISRA or have some revenue enhancements, you know, we've got to have the 20% cut as part of the package to even get there. And what, you know, we talked about this before, and then we get back to K through 12. And if you look at the projections that LSO has provided to this committee from Dawn, you know, none of us want to see a cliff for K through 12, but unless something's done, you know, now that cliff could happen, and it's a huge cliff, the 20% that they would fall off of, given the current levels of funding. So what are you talking about in relation to K through 12? I know the governor's mentioned some things that might be going on, and what's your discussion on that, and what are your thoughts there?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I'm seeing the same numbers that the Joint Appropriations Committee and LSO and what we have in our profile for K-12. The challenge with K-12 is a different, is completely different in how the modeling works with the legislature and moving into those reductions. We understand what that is. It moved from $200 million when we were in, when we released the budget, when the legislature appropriated that the budget, there was already an automatic set aside for 200 million, and it's grown to 500 million. So that's a situation that we have to understand and we have to work on.
Well, we all understand it's a situation we have to work on, but my question is, well, what are we working on and what are we doing? And if you can't answer that now, we can maybe get an answer a little bit later. Representative Larson just has really got a question that's burning. Go ahead, Representative Larson.
It is burning. Thank you. So, Kevin, what would help me is in this discussion we talk about and the importance of this additional 10% that Representative Summers is talking about, or 20%, is so we know that with the addition of the 117 million, we're at 760 million shortfall now in our general fund, 514 in education. With the 10% cut you're making, you reduce the general fund deficit down another 250, so that leaves us at about 510. If we do that again, we're still about 250 million short. And so the conversation that we're chewing on internally as a legislature is always how long do we cut, or can we cut our way out of this? We've heard that before. Or when do we start looking at ways to generate revenue to close, and what do we have to close? Is it that 250 million after you do the second 20, the second cut or the third cut, or do we need to start now? And the more information we have helps us drive that discussion, I believe, better. You know, if we're only going to be 100 million and less than that or something on education, however that works, does that extend the life of the LISTRA out longer? And we, you know, we pray and do dances and hope that our economic position gets better before we do anything to raise additional revenue. So I guess we're somewhat on our knees pleading and saying the sooner that we can get that and see the impact and what that does to our general fund budget and others really puts us in a better position to voice our position and the need to do to say, no, we're just going to wait and cut our way out of it, or to say, no, we need to start looking at some of these tax exemptions or other ways to generate revenue. I hope that makes sense. But the more you provide to us, better, the more clear the picture is.
I think that's absolutely true. I won't provide a number. I just don't get out in front of the governor, but the math is better than what you represented on this first on step 2. And step 3, I think there's going to be a longer conversation about that, because we've already had them. We've talked about you could cut all the state employees completely and not be able to get to that level. You'd take higher education completely off the table and you couldn't get to that number. So step 3 is going to be a conversation about the catastrophic nature of what we would have to do if we wanted to cut out of this situation. I think step 3, we're going to have conversations about, well, what does this look for the revenue picture? What's driving that for the general fund and for the school foundation side as well?
You know, the one thing that I would add to all of this discussion, I think it's great discussion. And you mentioned earlier, Kevin, we are the appropriators, and the appropriators have a standing committee. That's a JAC. That's what you're looking at. That's who's talking now. And to me, the sooner we're involved, the better. And of course, I thought it made sense to me, given the nature of these shortfalls and what's going on, that we should be having a session for us to talk about real budget and work with you to do it and have us involved in that process, rather than here it is, we get a letter and we tell you what we think or don't think, and then there's nothing we do until maybe, you know, in that next budget cycle, general session that starts in January, which is, in my opinion, too little too late. Anyway, that's I don't know if there's a question there, other than the sooner we get the information, the sooner we see where the executive branch is. We want to be involved as much as we can, but unless there's a special session to deal with the budget, rather than just COVID, to deal with this budget, and the sooner the better. I think we'll all agree on that. There's going to be some real heavy lifting over and above the potential 20% cuts that occur in January. And I think you would probably agree with all that, but here's where we are.
So, Mr. Chairman, we want to get step 2 out as soon as possible, and we'll do that. And then I would enjoy conversations with the Joint Appropriations Committee and the chairman about the profile as well. You know, be thinking about the opportunities, or maybe what we were exposed to. Those are all healthy for all of us.
Well, there's a lot of people that feel like before we even talk about revenues, including me, we have to see where these cuts are and to make those hard decisions. And so if everybody's thinking, well, we'll put off the cuts and here come the revenues, I'm not sure that the legislature will go for that next year. Who knows? So once again, the sooner the better we make decisions. I think it helps everybody, but in order for that to happen, the only way to do it would be a special session. And right now, I have my doubts that that'll occur. So I guess we just look out and do the best we can, given what we have. Anybody have any other questions of Kevin on this, any of these issues? Any other questions? Mr. Co-Chair, I was hoping we have some numbers now so we could go through it as a committee and see where the cuts are and be able to evaluate and see what we think, yay or nay, and to provide at least some support for what the governor's doing, or maybe some concerns. But if we're not going to have that till maybe next week, I guess we could just send it out and have have the committee voice their concerns with us individually or to collectively, and we let the governor know what's your thoughts on this and how do we move forward? I think to wait till October is too late. I think if we have whatever we think, we ought to let him know sooner the better, particularly since a lot of the first 10% will affect the next 10%. What are your thoughts, Mr. Co-Chair?
Mr. Co-Chair, I think we need to see the reports first, and then we can have a discussion about it. I mean, just for example, we know what the requests were for the community colleges on how they were going to make some of those cuts, and so at one point, do we disagree with that immediately through part of a special session or through a JAC meeting, and how that will then translate across all agencies? I just think we have to look at it first, and then I think you and I can talk and we can get a consensus amongst our respective bodies to figure out our next steps.
I think that's pretty much where I would be as well. Any other committee members have any thoughts or input they'd like to add to this? Seeing none. Kevin, anything else? Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, just to appreciate all the hard work everybody's done. This is a very difficult task for everybody. I appreciate LSO's continued support and question answering, and I appreciate the Joint Appropriations Committee as well. We'll get this to you as soon as we can, and that's a promise.
Well, appreciate that, and we all are working towards the same goal to be able to curb in this habit of spending that we have and have the structural deficit. And I quite frankly, I'm so tired of hearing about it. It'd be nice if there was resolution to it. I'm not sure if that will get done in the near future or not. It sure needs to be done. So we stand by like we always have to work in conjunction with the executive branch to do that. So boy, Kevin, the sooner the better. I think Representative Summers said it best, and we're not pushing you, but we're pushing you. So consider pushed, Kevin, and I know you do the best you can, and we appreciate that.
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate that as well. And I get up every morning and I come here to try to get it done as soon as I can. Putting the hours in.
Oh, we know that. Okay, thanks again for that, Kevin, for that update. Don, I think that brings us to some further discussion. I would take this opportunity to see if there's anyone out there that's been listening to our meeting, if they have any public comments about anything and everything we've talked about today, to open the floor for public comments, whether they're in the room or they're out there, whatever. Don, do we have any?
Mr. Chairman, we have a couple of people who've been listening in. I think they were on specific topics. Mayor Orr, I think, has been listening in all day. She had an issue with the capital construction bill. I don't think she has anything further. And then Senator Coe and Dr. Caldwell are also still on the line. That's the only individuals that have showed up this afternoon.
Okay, then those individuals out there, if any of you would wish to provide public testimony, let's zoom them in or whatever we need to do, Don, and raise their hands, and we'll be glad to hear from them. Let's start with Senator Coe. You got anything else you want to add? I think he just answered. Who was the next?
No, I don't, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Coe. Appreciate that. Who was next, Don? Was there another member of the legislature?
No, Mr. Chairman, all of the other chairmen have left. Mayor Orr and Dr. Caldwell are the only other members who are participating.
Okay, we've heard from Sandy before. Sandy, do you have anything else you'd like to add? Thank you for that. Mayor, you're out there. We haven't heard from you. Would you like to provide some testimony? Hello? Have you got her turned on, Don? Let me rephrase that. Is she on our Zoom meeting?
Mr. Chairman, she is, but she's muted and her video is off. She may be in another meeting just monitoring.
Okay, then we'll leave that alone. Thank you. That concludes public testimony. All right, anything else that we need to talk about? Mr. Co-Chair, you got anything else? Let's talk about next meeting and some updates from Don first. Anything else, Don, we need to be discussing?
Mr. Chairman, you have a tentative meeting date on Monday and Tuesday. I believe it's October 26th and 27th. And that would include the presentation of the October CRAG, as well as a number of items both discussed today, as well as at your July 13th and 14th meeting. Obviously, well, it seems that a number of not only working groups, but also developments related to either congressional action or inaction, or the governor's budget reductions could modify that schedule going forward.
And we have submitted to Management Council the request for additional money for our meetings. That's correct.
Mr. Chairman, I have that approval that I received today. I would offer this one comment. If you are anticipating another meeting between now and October, and in the last 30 minutes or so, I heard some suggestion that that might be an interest. I would consider adding an additional $8,000 or so to your request, if that is your desire.
Well, wait a
Mr.
minute.
Co-Chair.
Go ahead, Mr. Co-Chair.
So the request, Don, is tailored for COVID dollars, isn't that correct? Or how is it broken down?
So, Mr. Chairman, your June meeting was almost entirely COVID related. Your July meeting was not. And the reason being is all of those were interim topics like EGI. Not all of them, but I think 85 or 90% of them were not related to COVID. They were related to your normal. This meeting here is largely COVID related updates, congressional action related. So it will have a sizable percentage associated with that. You'll recall that we do save money every time we meet online. There's no question about that, but there's also a preparation day, as well as salary and per diem for all members. And I think a one-day meeting is costing about $4,800. A two-day meeting, about double that.
Did you say per diem for when we meet Zoom meetings?
Mr. Chairman, that's correct.
So, Mr. Co-Chair, what I suggest we do is we add $4,000 or $5,000 of COVID funds, because if we have another meeting, it's going to be directly COVID related between now and October 26th.
I think that's a good idea. Would that bring the total to 11,000, as I recall, Don?
Mr. Chairman, that is correct.
Yeah, we might as well ask for it, especially if it's COVID related. I didn't realize we were taking per diem when we're doing a Zoom meeting, but anyway, I guess we are. So, okay, let's do that on that letter and make that correction and get that letter out, because we may very well do that and have that. Okay, is there anything else, Don, that you had?
Mr. Chairman, I do not have any other updates.
Don, we asked for some more in-depth information on the EGI. Remember, there was kind of the quick information, and then they were going to go do some more homework to provide more data. So why don't you just follow up on that and see where they're at with that, and just make sure that it's being followed up on?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, actually the ball is in the chair's court on this one. So Siegel has responded. They have identified a spreadsheet of information. It is significant. It has not been sent out. It is in the form of a request. It has not been sent out to all 48 school districts. And they've also provided the legislature with an estimated cost to conduct the actuarial analysis, as well as a timeline. So I think the timeline for their analysis is 8 to 10 weeks, and that is after what we estimate to be at least 3 weeks for the school districts to fill out all of their requested materials. It is quite voluminous. Dozens, if not hundreds, of data points are being requested in order to do the analysis. I believe, and I can double check this, but I believe they submitted a cost. It's somewhat less than $100,000 to do the computations and the actuarial study. And we had submitted this to yourself and Chairman Bebout as to what next steps should be taken, given the direction of the last meeting. And at this point, I don't think there's a agreement on what those next steps are.
So I guess, Don, what we need is a kind of a thumbnail sketch of the validity of what they're going to ask for and what it's going to produce and how it might benefit us to really to make that kind of a call. Because I don't know that it's, I think one of the issues is that the information that they need is probably already out there, as opposed to having fill out questionnaires. And the question is, has it been provided? And my recollection is that the provider has been fairly reluctant to give us hard data, even though we ask for it on a kind of repetitive basis. So we can discuss that when we're off the air. You're muted, Eli.
Okay, so anything else then, Don, that you've got? One of the things that I think, before I recognize Representative Larson, Mr. Co-Chair, on our working group for the COVID things, I think we need to do that, and Representative Summers was on there, and you, and I'll engage Senator Agar, but so we need to be doing something like that, maybe the end of next week. I don't know what your timetable is, but anything like that works for me, and sort through all that. I don't want to have that not being done if something should happen in a quick way that we need to move ahead. So I'd like to get that done. Are you okay with that?
Sure.
Yeah. So you're sure you're okay with that?
Yeah.
Okay. My internet connection is not working again. Representative Summers, we got to work on that last mile. All right. Well, maybe Representative Nicholas, why don't you take over and wrap up? I'll listen, but I'm having trouble on the internet. It comes and goes right now. So why don't you interject? I will.
Lloyd.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dawn, back in November 2005, there was a study on cost comparison of school districts and EGI that Senator Case gave me from the time he was on the Appropriations Committee. I found it to be very interesting and kind of a deja vu. I just was going to suggest that if staff could find that maybe the members of the committee might find that an interesting perspective and as well.
Mr. Chairman, we'll do so.
It's by Buck Consultants.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Representative Summers.
Mr. Chairman, just quickly, just so you know, it's as Senator Kinski knows, we're also going to have health insurance kind of on the agenda of the recal committee in our September meeting. So both of these conversations will, ultimately play into each other. So it's good, if I can get as much information from Don on what he's gathering to Matt. I'm sure you guys cross-pollinate on that stuff to Matt Wilmarth, but we'll need to hear whatever you get as well, so we have as much information on that committee as well.
Okay, anything else? I don't have anything further. Eli, anything further?
Yeah, Mr. Co-Chair, if you can hear me, I wanted to thank staff and the governor's staff as well as our LSO staff for all their hard work in getting all this information to us. We couldn't make these tough decisions we have to make without having good information. So thank all of you for that, and thank everybody for participating. And And one last thing, Mr. Chairman, as soon as we log off the live, I want to convey something to the committee. So as soon as we log off, I want to do that.
Okay, with that, I think that let's just stay on board, but we'll be adjourned formally, and let's log off of the YouTube. Thanks, everybody.